The existence of React Native makes React one of the most valuable skills you can learn. Think about it. About 75% of what you already know from building websites carries over to mobile development. And that's exactly what you'll learn in this video. I used to compare React Native to React, but now it's more like Next.js, because now on mobile, you can do everything from file-based routing and component-driven architecture to API routes, even React server components. React Native is evolving fast, and this crash course will help you keep up. Hi there, I'm Adrian, and welcome to the Ultimate React Native Crash Course. In this course, you'll learn React Native from scratch, master the latest features, and build a modern, fully functional app. We'll start with a quick look at React Native's journey, why React Native is the go-to choice, and how it actually works, an introduction to Expo, the official React Native framework, mastering core building blocks, file structures, routing, and more. And then we'll dive straight into building a fully featured movie app with a home screen that has the top trends feature, showing the hottest movies using an algorithm that you'll write and that will power using the open source tool called Appwrite. And you'll also be able to see some latest movies here. Then, of course, there's the custom tab navigation, a search screen to find any movie in seconds, and a full movie details page where you can get all the info you need and more. But this course isn't just about building an app. It's about building it the right way, by writing clean, scalable, and maintainable code. And to make your journey even easier, I've put together a free React Native roadmap that covers the essential tools you need to know, the projects you should build, and the exact path to getting hired as a React Native developer. You can download it now, it's completely free, and the link is in the description. So, by the time you finish this course, you won't just know React Native, you'll be shipping real apps with confidence. So, let's build something great. Before React Native, building mobile applications for multiple platforms was a nightmare. You had to write separate code bases for iOS and Android, which meant double the work, higher costs, and slower development cycles. But with React Native, you can write a single code base that works seamlessly on both platforms, making development faster, cheaper, and more efficient. And it's not just me saying this. Big companies like Meta, Discord, Microsoft, Tesla, Amazon, Airbnb, and even Call of Duty use React Native to build their mobile apps. React Native has evolved so much that you'll find fewer people fluttering these days. And with the release of React's new architecture, performance has been improved significantly. So the next time someone says, "Hey, React Native apps are slow," just take a deep breath and say, "Not anymore, Flutter boy." Let me break it down. First, there's the new JSI, JavaScript interface, which replaces the old bridge, allowing JavaScript to communicate directly with the native code for faster and smoother performance. Then, there are the new turbo modules that load native modules only when needed, reducing startup time and memory usage. And third, there's a new thing called Fabric, which optimizes UI rendering, making animations, gestures, and updates faster and more efficient. With JSI, turbo modules, and Fabric, React Native apps are now as fast and smooth as the native ones. And aside from its new architecture, cross-platform support, and native components, React Native also comes with hot reloading, allowing you to see the changes you code instantly. A huge community that just keeps on growing, and an easy learning curve, which means that if you already know JavaScript and React, you can quickly pick up React Native. And that's exactly what we'll do today. In this video, we'll use Expo to build our React Native application. And before you say, "Wait, real developers don't use Expo," hold on. If you check React Native's official documentation, Expo is the recommended way to get started. Read that again. But what the heck even is Expo? You're familiar with tools like Vite, right? Well, Expo is just that, only for React Native apps. It provides many tools and services that simplify development and help you build your app more easily. Expo is to React Native what Next.js is to React. It's a framework that simplifies React Native development, by handling the development environment setup, which means that you don't need to separately install Android Studio native dependencies and pre-built components for navigation, gestures, camera, maps, and more. It also supports something known as over-the-air updates, so your app users can get the latest code without needing App Store approvals. And this is huge. With Expo, you can deploy your app in minutes. But don't just take my word for it. Companies like Discord, Burger King, Coinbase, Xbox, and more than 2,000 companies are using Expo for their tools. And Expo, just like Next.js, just keeps on getting better. So if you still think React Native CLI is the better option, well, think twice. So now that you understand the importance of React Native and apparently how easy it is to build apps with it, let me show you. I'll first teach you some basic React Native concepts, and then very quickly into this video, you'll build a real mobile movie application. So let's dive right in. All right, let's jump right in. We've already talked about the benefits and drawbacks of React Native and how Expo can make your life easier. Now it's time to dive into the code and see how it works. If you've worked with React.js before, you'll find that React Native uses a similar syntax. But of course, there are some differences you should be aware of. So let me show you the ins and outs of React Native code. We can check out how it looks and how it functions when compared to React.js to help you understand the similarities, but also the differences between the two. So super quickly, you'll understand React Native's components and how to use them. When coding in React Native, you use JavaScript, just like with React. But instead of rendering HTML elements, you'll be rendering native mobile components. Take a look at this basic React Native component. Here, we're importing two important components from React Native library, view and text. Then we create a functional component called app that returns the text component wrapped inside of a view. What's interesting here is that we're using JSX syntax, which makes it super easy to create and visualize our components in a more HTML-like way. But if you take a closer look, you can quickly see that this is neither a p tag, nor an h tag, nor anything that we're used to while writing code that runs in the browser. In React Native, we use text instead. It's pretty straightforward. The text component is used to display text in the app, and you can style it using the same CSS-like syntax as in React. You can set the font size, color, and weight using the style prop. React Native also offers a style sheet utility that allows you to define styles by creating a single JavaScript object. This is super handy in larger applications as it optimizes performance. But as we all know, Tailwind CSS is rising in popularity. So in React Native world, Nativewind came into the picture, allowing you to write Tailwind-like CSS styles in React Native. Isn't this crazy? It feels like you're writing a regular web app, but instead you're developing apps for mobile. Now, let's talk a bit about the view component. Think of it as a box or container that holds other components. Similar to the div element in HTML, but with some added functionality specific to mobile apps. The view component is often used to create layout structures for other components. It has many different props that can be used to control its appearance and behavior. And one thing to note is that the view component uses Flexbox layout by default, which makes it really easy to control how its children components are laid out. So you can use Flexbox properties like flex direction, justify content, and align items to achieve any layout you want. But what if you want to add some interactivity to your React Native apps? Well, get excited because there are some amazing components that do just that. Components for creating buttons, links, and other interactive elements. The first one on the list is touchable opacity, which is great if you want to create a simple button. Think of it like a cousin to a React button component, but with even more room for customization. And instead of an on-click, in React Native, you're not clicking it, you're pressing it. So let's provide an on-press. The second similar component is called a touchable highlight, which allows views to respond to touch in a unique way. When touched, the component reduces the opacity of the wrapped div, revealing the underlying color. And then there's the touchable without feedback, which is there if you need to create an element that is clickable, but you don't want it to have any visual feedback when pressed. It is super useful when creating links or images that don't need any additional effects. And apart from these touchable components, there's also Activity Indicator, which allows you to show a spinner or a loading indicator within your app. Sure, there's also a simple button allowing you to set properties like the title, color, and an on press that is called when the button is pressed. But whenever you need some more advanced styling or behavior, you'll find yourself using the touchable components much more often as they offer greater flexibility. Now, the next super important component on the list of components I want to teach you right now, and which we'll use later on within our app, is called a flat list. A flat list is perfect for rendering long lists of items that need to be scrolled. It's like the map function in React, but with some extra features like optimized scroll performance and item separation. The way it works is you, of course, import it from React Native, and then you define some data, such as an array of objects you want to map over. Then you put it all in a view, and you call it flat list. A flat list by default already accepts some props, such as the data prop, to which you can pass an array of data you want to map over, and then a render item prop, which allows you to define exactly how you want to represent each item in the array. Pretty cool, right? Now, when should you use a flat list, and when should you just map over the elements? Well, for larger lists where you want to have smooth scrolling, go for the flat list. While for the smaller lists, the map function will do the job. There's also something known as a scroll view. You can think of it like a magic box that can hold multiple components and views, providing you a scrolling container for them. It's like the overflow scroll property of a div in HTML, allowing you to easily navigate through a list of items or large amounts of content in our app. You can put it within a view, call it scroll view, and then render some elements within it. By using the scroll view component, you can make sure that users can easily explore all the content, making your app more intuitive. And there's also a component which you'll find yourself using super often called Safe Area View, which gives you some sort of a safe zone to render your app's content within without it being covered by the device's hardware features like the notch, home indicator, or a status bar. It's great for building apps that are supported on different devices with different screen sizes and shapes. The way you use it is whenever you think something might be too long or awkwardly placed, you just wrap it within a safe area view. And while that default safe area view is amazing for most cases, sometimes it does fall short for some devices, making it not the optimal choice. So I often like to use a package called React Native Safe Area Context, which works across all devices, even for the bottom bar. But you don't have to worry about remembering all of that right now. I'll show it to you once you start developing your own first app. But bear with me for a moment. I first want you to know which components exist so we can later on use them more easily. For example, we'll surely have to display some images within our app, right? So how can we do that in React Native? Well, thankfully, once again, it is super similar to how it looks like in React. You just use the image component provided by React Native, you pass the source to it, which can be a path or a URL, and you're good. But if you want to display an image as a background, then you should use the image background component, which works in the same way, but just renders it as a background. It's specifically designed to allow other components to be layered on top of it, whereas just the image is used for displaying images on their own. And both of these can handle different image formats like PNGs, JPEGs, GIFs, and WebPs, but none support SVG files because of some native rendering limitations. So if you want to use SVGs, there's a third-party package called React Native SVG. Once again, don't try to remember it. I'll show it to you once again later on so you can use it within your own code. Okay, now that you know how to use images, what about modals? Well, thankfully, React Native has components for that too. It's called a modal. Just import it from React Native, set visible to true, add an animation type, and define what happens when you close it. Pretty simple. There's also an alert component, which you can, again, just very conveniently import from React Native and call it by saying alert.alert, provide a title and functions which you want to execute on cancel or on OK. And if you're creating forms, you might want to create some kind of a toggle in React Native. And for that, you can use a switch component. Once again, it is super simple. Import it, create a state for it, same as in React, create a function that manages it, and then simply call it like this within your code, provide some colors, its value, and what happens when you click it. There's also a component that I use super often called the status bar. Both React Native and Expo have their own versions that allow you to control how status bar should look like for each screen within the app. I prefer using the one from Expo. You can define a view with some text, and just beneath it, you can define a status bar. But what am I even trying to do? I'm just listing all of the different components that you can use to build your mobile applications. Well, I guess I'm just trying to show you that there are some differences, like p tags and h tags are now becoming text, divs are becoming views, but other than that, there are so many components that feel like you're writing React code within React Native, allowing you to build mobile applications. From touchable opacities for buttons to modals, alerts, and more, the list doesn't stop there. Of course, I don't want to waste your time. We're not going to go through every single component that exists in this video, but I did take some time and I wrote down the most important ones within the free React Native guide linked in the description. So if you want to check them out there, see the differences and similarities, and just have a place where you can recap what you learned, that guide is what you need. But now that you know the most important components and concepts in React Native, let's dive right into action. I'll show you how to set up your app, what files and folders are involved, and everything else that matters, step by step. All right, before we dive into the development of the Movies app, let me quickly tell you what you'll build and learn along the way. You'll get the first-hand opportunity to put into code many components I was just telling you about a couple of minutes ago. Core React Native components like view, touchable opacity, image, flat list, scroll view, safe area view, text input, and more. Different navigations like stack navigation, tab navigation with custom styling, and advanced file-based routing, including nested and dynamic routes. Custom hooks and fonts to make your app more flexible and reusable, types and interfaces with TypeScript for better type safety, responsive design to ensure the app looks great on any screen, of course, Tailwind CSS for clean and scalable design, backend with Appwrite to handle data and user interactions, and many other best practices. We'll go step by step, and I'll teach you to implement amazing stuff which you'll see yourself using across any future apps you build, like a search feature with optimized performance, fetching movies data from a third-party API, smooth loading and error handling, and then a trending movies algorithm that tracks user searches and helps us recommend the most popular movies based on real user activity. Pretty cool, right? We'll use Appwrite to store that user activity for this algorithm to work. So let's quickly create an account. Click the link down in the description to be able to follow along and see exactly what I'm seeing. Create your account at the top right, or just sign in. As you can see, I'm using Appwrite for many of my projects. And now you can just create a new one for this one. I'll call it JSM_RN movie app. You can do something similar. And you can choose the region and click create. Now we can set up our project's file and folder structure, and very soon we'll put this project to use. Let's get started with developing our app by first setting up our development environment. I've created a new empty folder on my desktop, called it Mobile Movie App, and opened it up within my IDE. Throughout this course, I'll be using WebStorm, the most powerful JavaScript and TypeScript IDE. Until recently, it was paid, so not everyone was able to use it. But as of now, it is completely free for non-commercial use. I'll leave the link in the description. You can check it out and download it for your operating system. Once you install it, you can set it up to look exactly how you want it to look. Currently, I'm using the Material Deep Ocean theme, and lately, I prefer using it over VS Code. So once you create an empty folder in whichever editor you're using, we can create our new React Native application. If you head over to reactnative.dev, click Get Started, you'll notice that there are a couple of different ways in which you can initialize your React Native projects. And as I've mentioned in the crash course, the recommended way, of course, is Expo. It'll provide us with a lot of important features out of the box, making our development experience that much better. So to start your React Native app with Expo, the only thing you have to do is run this command in your terminal. So let's write it together by opening up the terminal and running npx create-expo-app add latest, and then add / to install it in the current directory. Now it'll proceed to install all the necessary packages that we need to run our React Native application. And you can see that it's also starting to create our file and folder structure. Very soon, I'll explain exactly what all of these files and folders mean and what they do. Once it gets installed, you'll be able to run it. Now, going back to the docs, it says, hey, run this command and then continue with Expo. And when you click it, it'll show you how you can set up your development environment no matter which device you're using. In this case, I'll be using a real iOS device, but you can also use an Android. Then it's asking you how you would like to develop, and we'll be using Expo Go. So depending on your operating system, you'll be able to scan the QR code to download it or visit the Expo Go page on the App Store. Once you install it, you'll be able to create your account and your screen should look something like this. So the first thing we have to do is start a development server by running npx expo start. So back within our terminal, let's do just that, run npx expo start, and you'll be able to see different letters that allow you to do different things, but you don't have to press any of them. What you have to do is just scan this QR code. So I'll open up my camera and scan it right here. It'll say bundling, and in a couple of seconds, the app will run on your phone. There we go. We are live. As I mentioned, we don't need to rely on heavy tools like Android Studio or Xcode. Instead, we're using this easiest method to develop apps with React Native, which of course includes this Expo app on your phone. And as you can see, I can switch between different pages, touch different elements on the screen, and it feels like I'm using a real mobile application. Now, if you're not seeing what I'm seeing on the screen, then that must mean that you're having some problems. And thankfully, there's a couple of quick fixes. First, make sure that you're on the same Wi-Fi network on your computer and your device. And if it still doesn't work, it may be due to the router configuration, common for public networks. On iOS, you might have to grant the local network permission to the Expo Go app, or you can try using this npx expo start -- tunnel, or just read whatever the Expo app is saying and try resolving it step by step. But with that in mind, we are now ready to make our first change. To do that, we can head over within our app, tabs, index.tsx, and if you see this welcome themed text, you can say something like, welcome to my movie app, because that's exactly what we're building. If you save it, you can see that it'll change immediately, and we can remove this wave. So this means that we have established a connection between our code and our device, so we can see all the changes live. Now that our project is running, let me quickly explain what each one of the files and folders here does, so you have a better understanding of the entire code base, so you can more confidently make changes to your application later on. Let's start from the bottom to the top. First, we have the tsconfig, which contains the rules that TypeScript will use to enforce type safety throughout the project. And no worries, you don't need to know TypeScript to be able to proceed with this course. I'll teach it to you as we go. Next, we have the README, which is a text file containing some information about the project. Then there's the package lock and package.json, which contains the project scripts, dependencies, and additional metadata. After that, there's the app.json file, which contains the configuration options for the project and is often called the app config. These options change the behavior of your project while developing, building, submitting, or updating our app. Everything starts with an Expo object, which is the root object containing all of the app configuration. Then, of course, there's the app name shown on the home screen or the app screen, very important in case you want to make it custom. Then there's the slug, which is a unique identifier for the project used by Expo. It's used when defining the URL if you want to show your project on the web. There's the version of the project, the orientation, which defines whether your app should initially open in portrait, landscape, or the default screen orientation mode. The icon is the full path to the image you want to display. The scheme is a custom URL to enable deep linking. In this case, let's set it to movies. So later on, we can do something like movies, / some path. There's also the user interface style, which we can leave to automatic. This determines the dark or light mode. And then there's this new arch enabled, which enables the new architecture of React Native for better performance. It was that thing that I talked to you about in the crash course part, regarding JSI, turbo modules, and more. And what's best is that Expo immediately supports this new architecture without you having to do anything. Along with this, you're also getting the newest React features like transitions. Moving on, we have iOS-specific features that you can extend specifically on iOS devices. In this case, you can define whether it supports tablet devices. And then there are also Android-specific properties, such as app's adaptive icon, path to the image, color, and more. And similarly, there's also additional options for the web. Now, coming out of the app.json, there's of course the git ignore, which allows us to ignore some environment variables or git-related things. There's the scripts folder, currently having just one part, which allows us to reset the project to the bare minimum code. And then there's some boilerplate code, like custom hooks, constants, some components, assets, and finally the app folder, which allows us to route to different pages, similarly to Next.js. Or in this case, we're not calling them pages, we're calling them screens. You can see this tabs group in which we have more files. Within here, you'll be able to manage the layouts for different pages, and very soon I'll show you exactly how it works. There is a lot of code, but you don't have to memorize all of this boilerplate code, because I'll teach you how everything works from scratch. So let's use this nice script that Expo has given to us called reset project, which will set the project to its bare minimum. I'll stop the application from running, and then I will run npm run reset-project. It's going to ask you whether you want to move everything to the example folder. I'll say no, just go ahead and delete it. So as you can see, all of these folders have been deleted and some new files, very bare bones, have been created. We can once again run npx expo start to start the development server. And then you can just press the letter R to reload it automatically on your device. Now, if you check it out, it'll look much simpler. The app only consists of a very simple layout and an even simpler index.tsx page where we can say welcome, and we can dive right into extending it to build our movie application. Great job on completing the setup. We're done with the general setup of the application, but there are still some things we gotta set up, such as additional packages for styling and configuration that'll make our job easier later on. One of those packages is called Nativewind. Nativewind doesn't even have its own landing page. It just says, do you like using Tailwind CSS to style your apps? Well, this helps you do that in React Native. So we'll use it for that exact reason. You can install it by opening up a new terminal, keep this one running because it's the one running our app, and run npm install Nativewind, Tailwind CSS, React Native Reanimated, and React Native Safe Area Context. These are some packages that are going to make our styling easier. Let's give them a few moments until they install. And once that is done, run npx tailwind css init. This will generate our configuration file. You can find it within your code right here, tailwind.config.js, and you'll get a default configuration. But to make sure it works properly with our React Native setup, we'll need to update it a bit. Here, you want to include all the files that you want Tailwind to style. So in this case, everything within the app folder that ends with JS, JSX, or TS or TSX. And we're also adding a Babel preset. So just copy it from Nativewind's Expo setup and just override what you had in the Tailwind config file. Finally, create a new file within the app folder and call it globals.css. And within it, you'll have to import 3 things. Or rather add 3 Tailwind directives: Tailwind base, Tailwind components, and Tailwind utilities. After that, we'll have to set up the Babel preset, so copy this config, and create a new file in the root of your directory called babel.config.js, and paste what you just copied. After that, we'll also have to modify our metro config. So just copy it, open up your terminal, and run npx expo customize metro.config.js. This will generate that config file, so you'll be able to find it right here, and you can override it with what we just copied from Nativewind. Get default config. With Nativewind, we wrap that configuration and we set it up. You don't have to worry about understanding what's happening here. This is just the setup to make the styling work. Finally, we can head over into our app_layout.tsx, and right here, we can import the /globals.css so we can actually apply some of these styles. And then at the root of your project, create a new file called nativewind-env.d.ts, and within it, add a triple forward slash, open up a new self-closing component called reference, and add types equal to native wind types. This will enable TypeScript to recognize Tailwind CSS classes, preventing constant error messages. And very quickly, head over into your Metro config and make sure that the input points to the right path to our globals.css file. So it is not /global.css, rather it is /app/globals with an s.css. This has to match this globals.css file. Once you do it, close all of your files and open up your terminal. To make sure that everything we've done right now actually works, you'll have to restart your application by pressing Ctrl+C. And this can get boring pretty soon. But whenever something is not working or your changes are not being reflected, just go ahead and reset it, it'll help. So start your app with a command npx expo start --clear. This will make sure that everything we've done actually gets taken into account. And then press R to reload your application. It'll first bundle it, and then depending on your internet speed, it'll download the code and it'll display it right here on the screen. So while that is happening, let me head over into the index.tsx file. And now, hopefully, we can style our applications using Tailwind. Instead of these default styles, let's remove these default inline styles. And instead, let's give it a class name and say something like flex-1, justify-center, and items-center, which should keep it centered like it did before. And we can also style this welcome by giving it a class name of text-5xl. And by the way, notice how my WebStorm IDE is giving me all of these options in a super nice way. So I immediately know exactly which styles will each one of these Tailwind CSS properties apply. We can also give it a text blue of 500 as well as font-bold. If you save it in a matter of seconds, you'll be able to see the changes reflected on your device. Now, instead of saying something like text dash and then manually defining the color like #123123, this is not going to work, right? Whenever you change one color, you have to change it across hundreds of different files. So what you typically do when using Tailwind is define custom themes within your configuration file. So head over into tailwind.config.js and extend your theme with some additional colors, such as a primary color of something like #030014. Now, going back to your app, you can just say text-primary, and it'll automatically take that color into account. Pretty cool, right? So where did I find this color? Well, just below, you'll be able to find a link to a complete Figma design of this project. You can go through it a bit, and if you go ahead and click a couple of times on different elements, it'll tell you what is the color of that specific element. So for example, we have this accent color of AB8BFF, so we can copy it, and back in the code, we can add that accent color just like this. And then you can use it very easily within your code by saying text-accent. There are also a couple of other colors from this design that I want to add. Maybe the dark background color, or this gray color right here that we want to use. You can find them on the design yourself and then copy them within your app, such as this variant of the dark color, or we can do it together right now. There aren't too many. Alongside the primary color, we'll also have the secondary, which is going to be #151312. We'll also have a couple of variations of the light color, such as the 100 variation of #D6C7FF. We can also have a 200 variant of #A8B5DB, as well as 300, which is going to be set to #9C A4AB. And we can have a couple of variations of the dark color, one for the bottom navigation bar and one for the background. So I'll say 100 #221F3D, as well as 200 variation of #0F0D23. If you save it, all of these variations of different colors will be extended in our theme So now we can very easily use them by saying text-dark-200, for example. And with that, we have just set up native wind inside of your project, allowing us to style our applications more easily. You'll definitely want to save this entire process somewhere, as this is something we'll have to do with every single app. And as you saw, it's not easy as ABCs. If you mess one thing, the styles will not be getting applied. So I'll include the entire native wind setup within that React Native guide down below, so you can always refer back to it even when you're building your own applications in the future. Great job on setting up the styling. Next, routing. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention something that is super relevant here. If you're struggling with Tailwind CSS and you think that would hinder your work on the React Native app, just recently I have published the updated version of the Tailwind CSS crash course, which teaches you everything you need to know about Tailwind in less than an hour. So if you want to revisit your Tailwind styling game before we proceed with the rest of the course, checking it out might be a good idea. It's time to do the routing. And as I mentioned before, routing in React Native works similarly to routing in Next.js. But even if you haven't tried it in Next.js, don't worry, because I'll show you exactly what that means. It simply means that your file within the app folder represents your route, and the file name is a URL pointing to that route. For example, the app.index.tsx represents your home route, the starting point of your app. And if you want to create another route, like let's say you want to onboard users to your app, you can create a new file and let's call it onboarding.tsx. And within it, you can run rnfes, which is a simple React Native functional export with component styles. So just a quick boilerplate so we don't have to write it by hand. If this didn't work for you, that must mean that you don't have the React and React Native extension for plugins installed. So just search for your plugins and search for React or React Native plugins. Once you've created this route, we have to figure out how we can get to it from the index route. So let's head over into the index, and just below the view that says welcome, let's put a link coming from Expo router, and let's give it an href of /onboarding, and it can simply say onboarding. If we save it, you can see it right here on your screen, and if you try clicking on it, you can see that it says unmatched route. But let's first reload. I'll open up my terminal and press the letter R and click on onboarding. And there we go. We have been redirected to the onboarding screen. And now you can use all your device's native back and forward functionalities, such as on iPhone, it is normal to scroll from left to right to go back. This works seamlessly. Similarly, let's say you want to create a route that shows the details of a movie. Well, we can create a new folder and let's call it movie. And within movie, we can create a dynamic route. So that means creating a file in which we wrap its name within square brackets. And you can define what the actual parameter is. In this case, I'll wrap it in a square brackets of id.tsx. Here, you can once again run rnfes, and this will create a boilerplate function, which we have to fix a bit. I'll call it details, export default details, and we have a style sheet at the bottom. So now the question is, how can we know on which movie's details page we're on? Are we on the Iron Man's details page or Batman's, for example? Well, we can extract the route param information in Expo like this by saying const destructure whatever name or title you put within the square brackets, and then get it from use local search params coming from the Expo router. If you do this now, you can use this ID variable. So I'll say movie details, and then I'll render the dynamic ID right here. So now back in our index.tsx, we can create another link, and this one will point to /movie/Avengers. And we can say Avenger movie. If we go back, you can now see this new link. And don't forget to reload. So one more time, just press the letter R and wait until it reloads, so we make sure that this new route we created is recognized. You'll have to do this whenever you add some new pages. Now, if you click on the second link, you'll see that we go to the movie details page, but it knows that we are on the Avengers movie details. You can play with that a bit more to fully understand how routing works, But what I'll do for now is remove those two examples that we have created by entirely removing the movie folder as well as the onboarding file. That's because I want to teach you how you would begin creating the screens for your entire application by first looking at the design. This right here is a typical React Native application. Well, it definitely has a design better than most of the apps out there, but you get the idea. We have the home page, some kind of a search page, and also a details page for whatever it is that we're searching through. We also have a bottom navigation for the home screen, search, saved, and the profile. And of course, there's also auth. So if you'd like me to extend this React Native course to include authentication too, let me know down below. But with that in mind, we now have to figure out how many screens we have, and for each one of these screens, we have to give it a proper route. First of all, there's the home screen, the search screen, the save or bookmark screen, the profile screen, and finally, the movie details screen. Out of these 4 screens, we only want to show the tab navigation for the first 4 screens and not the movie details, because we'll get to the movie details by, of course, clicking on the movie card. Expo allows us to do just that with route grouping. We can prevent a segment from showing in the URL by using the group syntax, which is just a pair of parentheses. So for example, if we have app root home.tsx, it'll match to home. And if we don't put it into a route group, then we'll have to say root home, which we don't want to do. So groups are great for organizing sections of the app. So let me show you how we can group our routes within the application. First, let's create a group route folder for our tabs. I'll call it, in parentheses, tabs. Within tabs, we can create a new _layout.tsx. So now we want to ensure that we show the mobile navigation only on that screen. Keep in mind that there can only be one index.tsx route. And right now, it is right here in the root of the directory, but we actually want to put it within tabs because the homepage is a part of the tabs layout. Next, let's create the other 3 routes by creating a new file and naming it profile.tsx. Let's quickly run rnfe, which will quickly spin up a new functional component. And let's create a second file right here, or a second screen, should I say, and let's call it saved.tsx. Also run rnfe, and finally create the last screen. Let's call it search.tsx and run rnfe. Now for the movie details, since it's outside of that tab layout, we want to create it within the app by creating a new movies folder, and within movies, create a new dynamic route of id.tsx within square brackets. There, you can also run rnfe and make sure to fix the name to movie details. There we go. Perfect. Now we want to hide this ugly header that we have right here at the top that says index. How can we do that? Well, we can head over into the app layout.tsx. That is this one that we had from before, not the one within tabs. And here we can expand the stack component. And within it, we can render something known as a stack.screen, which is a self-closing component where we can give it a name and say that it'll be a string of tabs. This is the route group which we created. And we can also give it options of header shown is false. And we also want to repeat this stack.screen for our movie details page by saying name is equal to movie /ID like this. And we can say options header shown is set to false. If you save this and reload, because the header is still here. Well, to hide it completely, we have to head over into the underscore layout of the tabs folder, and then you can run rnfe right here to create a new layout. Instead of returning a view right here, let's instead return something known as tabs, coming from Expo router. Within tabs, you can render a tabs.screen component. It is a self-closing component that has a name. In this case, it's index for the homepage, and then you can provide additional options. Here, you can also provide a header shown is set to false. as well as a title set to something like home, as this is the home page. Now, if you reload your application by opening up your terminal and pressing the letter R, you'll see that there is no header shown on top. And if I comment out this tabs.screen, you can see that we still have index, so it is hiding that single route. And then this one, stack.screen, if you comment it out, this one is actually hiding the group route. So we are right now under tabs index. This one right here hides the route groups header, and this one right here hides that specific screen's header. And it also gives it a name, which is then shown right here at the bottom. So tabs allow you to modify how your bottom navigation looks like. Now, why did I say modify and not create your tabs navigation? Well, that's because you can see, even though we have only declared the home route, immediately right off the bat, 3 additional routes are here and they work out of the box. We didn't do anything, but yet React Native recognized that we have 3 other routes right here: profile, saved, search, and then the home. And at the bottom, we can switch between them. But what tabs allow you to do is to further customize them. So let me say tabs.screen, make it self-closing, and let's give it a name of search, as well as the options of title search and header shown set to false. So now we can see it has a capital S right here. And let's duplicate it 2 more times. This one for the saved. So let me call it name saved and title of saved. Make sure that you called it exactly as you did right here. And the last one will be profile, and I'll call it profile. So now no matter in which route we are, you can see that the header is hidden. But this results in a super basic, boring navigation. To make it look more similar to what we have on the design, we have to customize it by defining different icons for each tab of the navigation screen. So I took the time to find some cool images and icons so I can share them with you. Below this lesson, you'll find this project's video kit, which includes the link to the project repo, which then includes the README that has the assets. So simply go here and download them. Once you download them, simply unzip them, head over within your project, and delete the current assets folder as we don't need it. Then simply drag and drop all of these folders within your movie app. There we go. I'll now explain everything that we brought in here. First, we have the assets. The assets contain the font that we'll be using, some icons, such as the home, logo, person, and more, and also some images, like the background image, the highlight, logo, and more. We also have some constants, such as the icons and images, where we export all of these images from a single file with a specific name, so it's easier to import them later on. And we also have some interfaces so that TypeScript knows what kind of fields will each one of our documents have. So with that in mind, let's head back over to our tabs layout to make our tabs go from this right here at the bottom to something that looks more like this. We can start customizing them. Let's start with the Home tab button. React Native, specifically the tab screen, allows us to specify how the tab bar icon will look like. You can provide a callback function where you get access to the state of that specific icon, whether it has currently been clicked or not. And then here we can return an empty React fragment for now. And within it, we can return maybe like a background image. What do you think? So first, I'll return an image background coming from React Native that'll have a source equal to images. Make sure to click enter right here before you finish typing them to auto import them from constants. My WebStorm did that very nicely for me here. So you can see that I imported images from add/constants/images. And then we can say images.highlight. Highlight is this little part. So when we're currently on that screen, you can show this little pill-like shape. Next, within this image background, we can render a regular image coming from React Native with a source equal to images.home. And we can give it a tint color equal to #151312, as well as a class name equal to size-5. And we can close it right here. And we can also give it a text property that'll simply render the word home. Okay, so now this is looking a bit off, definitely not what we expected. So let's style it a bit. I'll give this source a class name equal to flex, flex-row, w-full, flex-1, min-w of 112 pixels. I found this value to work the best, with a min height of 14, a margin top of 4, justify-center, items-center to fully center it, rounded-full, and overflow-hidden. There we go. So now we have this real pill-like shape if it's active. Let's also render an actual icon. It is under icons.home, but also make sure to import the icons from constants. And now we can see this icon. And we can style this text by giving it a class name of text-secondary, text-base, font-semi-bold, and margin left of 2. Okay, so this is looking good. Now, we want to repeat this for every single icon. And instead of copying this code and duplicating it 4 times, let's actually extract it into its own custom component. So this is not a React Native specific thing. It is just how we do things around React. So take this as a mini lesson. Whenever you have to repeat this multiple times, it's better to extract it, okay? So now I'll take this entire image background and I'll create a new component out of it by saying const tab icon is equal to a functional component that returns this image background, which I can just paste right here. But it seems like we have an error. So let's put this component to use by rendering it right here instead of the code that was previously on here. Tab icon. And immediately we get the same output, but it looks so much better. But now here's the problem. Whenever you extract something into a custom component, well, how are you going to reuse it, right? Because now if I head into the options of the search screen and I say something like tab bar icon, where again we can define how it looks like, and then I specify that I want to show some kind of an icon, well, what happens? It's going to be the same one as in the home. So of course we want to figure out a way of how we can differentiate those 2 places where that component is being used. And here, this is a mini lesson on reusability. You want to figure out how to make a custom component reusable. And you can do that, of course, through props. So many things here are always going to be the same, such as the image background component, the classes we're going to use, and the colors of the text. But what will change is going to be the icon, the text, and maybe the state of the focus. Are we currently on home or are we on search? So whatever changes from component to component, you have to pass it as a prop. I'll pass a focus state equal to focused, as well as an icon equal to icons.home, as well as a title equal to home. And I'll put it into multiple lines so it's easier to read. I'll copy it and I'll paste it right here for the search. But for the search, of course, it's not going to be just icons.home. It's going to be icons.search, and the title will be set to search. And now we can also just copy this entire tab bar icon and add it for the other 2 icons. This one, the third one, will actually be called save. So I'll say tab icon icons.save, and the title can be saved. The icon name is save without the D, but I decided to add the D right here, saved. And finally, the last one will be the profile. So here we can render focused icons.person, and the title will be profile. Now, if I save this, you can still see that all 4 of them say home. But now let me collapse them just so you can see how tidy this looks like. There we go. So now we have 4 different tab screens with different titles and icons. And the only thing we have to do is extract those props right here at the top, focused, icon, and title. For now, we can make them of the type any, and we have to use them whenever something has to be dynamic. So instead of icons.something, I'll simply render the icon that we're passing through props. And here, instead of saying home, I will render the title. If I now save this, you can see that the icons for all 4 of them have changed. Also, Not always we want to show this image background. We only want to show it if it's focused. So I'll say if focused. In that case, we can return whatever is right here. So I'll indent it properly and end it. Else, I'll return something much simpler, like a simple view that'll render an image of a source equal to icon, a tint color equal to hash A8B 5dB, and a class name of size of 5. Of course, import the view from React Native and give it a class name of size-full, justify-center, items-center, margin top of 4, and the rounded-full. If you do that, you'll notice that now the icons are going to look much better. So let's collapse our tab icon. And let's further customize how all of the icons together look. We can do that through options, not on the individual tab screens, but we can do it directly on the tabs by saying screen options. And here we can say tab bar show label. We can set that to false. So now we have no labels, just the icons. We can also modify the tab bar item style, and I'll give it a width of 100%, a height of 100% as well. I'll give it a justify content of center, as well as align items of center as well. And we can also modify the tab bar style. So this is the entire tab on its own, where I'll change the background color to hash 0F0D23. Border radius will be set to about 50. There we go. We can also give it a margin horizontal of about 20. Let's also give it a margin bottom of 36, a height of 52, a position of absolute, overflow of hidden, and border width of just 1, with a border color, which is going to be the same color we used above, 0F0D23. And there we have it. We have a navigation bar that looks much more similar to the one we have here. To make it perfect, we just have to fix this small little inconsistency where the height of this pill-like shape is not matching the height of the entire bar. So let's quickly head over into the tab icon and increase the min age from 14 to 16, and that did the trick. Perfect. So now take your phone in your hand and just click between different pages. You'll only see welcome on the home screen, and the rest of the pages will appear blank, but if you pay close attention to the top left corner, you'll see that some text is changing. It's just that it's not visible within our current view. But if you've been paying close attention to the crash course, I already mentioned that there's an element that can help us make sure that everything fits nicely within the screen. So we'll explore it soon. But I'm already super happy with this because you have just implemented a fully functional routing system with a custom bottom navigation bar that allows us to switch between 4 different screens. Great job. I know this was a long lesson, so I'll keep the next one much shorter, but equally as important. I'll show you how to customize the logo of your application, so when users want to use it, they know where to click. Before we start developing this beautiful home screen UI, I want to quickly show you how you can customize your Expo app to show the logo of your application when it's loading. If you check out your terminal, you'll see an error saying asset not found, and right here, unable to resolve your asset, assets, images, icon.png within your app.json or app.config.js. This is because when we change the assets, we're no longer satisfying the need of our app.js to show our application's icon. It's pointing to a path that doesn't exist. So let's fix it. We can show an icon called assets, images, logo.png. You can copy it, that full path, and we can also change it for Android as the foreground image. And while we're here, let's also change it for the web right here as the favicon. Oh, and right here under the Expo splash screen, let's modify it here as well. Perfect. So once you do this, open up your terminal and press R to reload your application for the changes to take effect. As soon as it bundles, the error will be gone and our icon will be applied. So now if you reopen your Expo app, you should be able to see something like this, mobile movie app right here. Or if you want to change the name to something better, like Movieflix, you can do that too. And for this change, you'll actually have to reopen your Expo app and rescan the QR code too. There we go. Now we can see this icon even on the splash screen. And when you open it within Expo, there we go. Both the icon and the title are here too. Of course, we're within Expo right now, but this would be reflected on your device's home screen. I mean, just imagine opening up your iPhone or Android device and seeing your app on the home screen right there with its icon and the title. Pretty cool, right? There we go. As promised, this was a short and sweet lesson. Next, we can focus on a super important part of this course, which is building out the UI of our homepage. So let's do that next. To start developing the UI of our home screen, head over into App, Tabs, and then index.tsx. Here is where we have this welcome. So for now, let's focus on implementing the header component. I'll clear this entire view and create another. This one will have a class name equal to flex-1 and bg of primary. Finally, we're going to go away from this light screen to a nice dark color. Within this view, we can render an image coming from React Native. See how WebStorm very easily auto-imports it at the top. And we can render a source and give it a source of images. Now keep in mind, if I just press enter, it'll auto-import it once again from @/constants/images, and I'll call the images.bg for the background. Let's position it a bit by giving it a class name equal to absolute. Let's also give it a W full, so it takes the full width of the screen, as well as a Z index of 0, so we can show some elements on top of it. Right below it, we can render a scroll view. This is used to make the whole screen scrollable. So if there's a lot of vertical content that might not fit within a single view, then you need to wrap everything within a scroll view for users with smaller devices to be able to see it. Let's give it a class name equal to flex-1 and a padding x of 5 to give it some horizontal spacing. Within it, for now, let's just render a single image that'll have a source equal to icons, again coming from constants, .logo with a class name equal to W of 12 for the width, H of 10 for the height, margin top of 20 to divide it a bit from the top, margin bottom of 5, and margin X of auto to center it in the middle. There we go. This is starting to look like a real app already. Now, if we had more content, we would have this ugly scroll bar at the right side. So to remove it, we can give an additional prop to the scroll view called shows vertical scroll indicator, which I'll set to false. And I'll also give it a content container style, which will be equal to an object where min height will be set to 100%, and also padding bottom will be set to 10. So now you can see if you scroll up and down, it kind of moves, the logo moves, right? But we have no content to show. So very soon we'll be able to add some content. But first things first, we have to ask ourselves, what is the first thing that we want to show on the homepage? And it'll be the search bar, which will be our first component of the day. So let's create a new components folder. And within it, let's create a new file called searchbar.tsx. And within it, run rnfe to quickly create a new component. Now, we want to be able to see that component somewhere. So let's head back into the index.tsx and let's head right below this logo image and render the view that'll have a class name of flex1 and margin top of 5, and within it, just render a self-closing search bar component coming from @/components/search bar. Now, you won't be able to see it yet because right now it is just a single piece of text, which is hard to see on a dark background, but of course we're gonna style it further. So let's start by giving this view a class name equal to flex-row items-center BG dark 200, rounded dash full, and padding X of 5, as well as padding Y of 4 to create some spacing. In between it, we can render an image, which is going to be kind of like a search icon. So let's import the image component and give it a source equal to icons.search with a class name equal to size of 5, a resize mode equal to contain, as well as a tint color equal to hash AB8BFF. And of course, don't forget to import the icons coming from constants. If you do that, you should be able to see this little icon at the top left. Below it, we can render a text input. Okay, so a text input is like an input component in React or in regular HTML, and it allows you to pass similar things to it, such as the onPress functionality, which for now I'll just leave as an empty callback function, a placeholder that you can pass to it, which can be something like search for now, a value, which can be equal to an empty string for now, an onChangeText, which for now will be equal to an empty callback function, a placeholder text color, which can be similar to our tint color, A8B5DB. There we go, now we can see it. And finally, we can give it a class name of flex-1, margin left of 2, and text-white. So now we have what appears to be a very simple search. And when you click on it, you can see that your keyboard actually opens up, giving you a way to type something in. Now, what we need to do to make this somewhat functional is pass the real onPress value from the index. So typically when you have smaller components like a search bar, on its own, it doesn't necessarily have to be concerned with what it is doing. Typically, you have some logic that you pass from the parent component to the child component, in this case, the search bar. So what we can do is define the router right here in the home page. You can say something like import use router coming from Expo router. You can define that router right here by saying const router is equal to use router. By the way, this is the first time we're using the router right here. And what we're doing here is essentially using something known as a hook. So in React, and therefore in React Native, when something starts with the word use, that means that it is called a hook. And hooks are typically called at the top of our functional components. And then they expose additional functionalities. In this case, the router functionality allows us to move between different screens programmatically, not necessarily by clicking a button or something, but we can use it to go to another page or screen when something happens. In this case, I will pass two props to the search bar. The first one will be the onPress functionality that will for now call the callback function and then call the router.push, which will push it to /search. Okay, so we want to move to the search screen once pressed, and I'll also pass a placeholder equal to search for a movie. Now, if we head into the search bar, we can accept these different props. So right here at the top, I can destructure them and accept the placeholder as well as the onPress. And these can be of a type props. So right above it, we can define a TypeScript interface called props and just say that the placeholder will always be of a type string and onPress will be optional and it'll be of a type function that returns void, meaning nothing. The goal of this function is not to return something, rather it is to use the router functionality to push to a different URL. So if you haven't used TypeScript before, don't worry. What this interface does is it simply tells our React application, or React Native in this case, what the types of those props should be. So now onPress, we can call the onPress functionality that we're passing through props, and also we can pass in the placeholder. There we go, search for a movie. Now check this out. As soon as I click search for a movie, it actually redirects me to another screen called the search screen, which we'll implement very, very soon. But of course, it doesn't make sense to start implementing the search a movie screen if we don't yet have any movies to search for. So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and fetch the movies data from a third-party API. To fetch the movies for our great mobile movie application, we'll use TMDB, a database of, I think, every movie that you can possibly think of. This is their public-facing website, but they also have an API. So if you Google for TMDB API getting started, or I'm gonna also leave the link in the description, then you'll be able to find this getting started guide. Head over to the API reference, and here you'll be able to give it a shot. We'll be using Node.js to make the calls, and you'll have to get your API key. It'll ask you to log into your account or to create it if you haven't before. So feel free to create your account as it is completely free. You don't have to worry about paying anything and you'll get access to all the data. Once you log in, you'll be able to see something like this, which is your account, and then head back over to the Getting Started guide and click the link that says API link. There we go. Here you'll have your API read access token. So copy it and save it somewhere, and do the same thing for the API key. Head over into the API reference, and if you're logged in, you'll see that all of the credentials will be filled in alongside a demo request that you can try. In this case, they're making a request to the authentication. So if I click try it, you can see that it succeeded. In this case, we'll be using the endpoint for discovering movies. So search for discover movie, and you'll quickly be able to find that movies is deprecated, but you should use discover movie instead. And it tells you right here which API request you have to call, find movies using over 30 filters and sort options, and it tells you right here what you can pass over into it. We can also give it a shot by clicking try it, and then you get back the total number of pages, which is 49,000 pages that has almost 1 million movies. And here, of course, you get more details for every single one out of those almost 1 million movies. How cool is that? Now, let's actually try to call this within our code. Let's go ahead and copy this entire fetch request by selecting it and then pressing Ctrl or Command C, and then heading back within our code. We'll create a new folder that we'll use for the API configuration. So let's create a new folder. Let's call it services. And within services, let's create a new file called api.ts. Within it, for now, you can paste this request that we just copied, but comment it out. We first want to set it up from scratch so it's fully reusable and more structured. First things first, we need to extract this key that was given to you. So if you head back to your credentials header, select it and copy it, you can now store it in a more convenient place, such as a .env file. This stands for environment variables, and make sure that it is in the root of your directory. I'll call it expo_public. If you're gonna use it on the front-end side of your Expo application, you have to prepend the name of your environment variable with expo public, and then say movie API key, and paste your environment key. Now, we won't have to every time spell it out within our code for everybody to see, but we'll be able to just refer to this variable. So instead of just making one single request, let's actually form a TMDB configuration that is reusable so we can actually change the way we interact with it. We can call it for multiple different endpoints. To do that, you can export const tmdb_config, and it'll be equal to a single object. Within the object, we can first pass the base URL like this. And the base URL will be this starting part up to the part where the endpoint will actually change. So sometimes it'll be discover movie, sometimes it'll be my profile, for example. But there's always a base URL that each API has. So https://api.themoviedb.org/3 and leave out the last /. We don't need it here. Next, we have to pass the API_key, which will be equal to process.env.expo_public_movie_API_key. This is coming from our environment variables. Next, we can pass the headers that we're making with the request, where we're going to pass the accept property to let it know what kind of data should it accept, and this will be equal to application.json. And also we have to pass the authorization header, which is equal to a template string of bearer, and then you once again render the process.env.expo_public_movie API key. We're not spelling it out like this. Perfect. So with that, we have basically utilized this entire part, and the only thing that remains to be changed is the URL that we're calling. So in this case, you can see we're looking for /discover/movie. But now that we have this configuration object, it'll be super simple to create a function that just calls one endpoint. Let me show you. Export const fetch movies is equal to an asynchronous function that will accept a search query, and we can open up a code block. Now, for this query, we also have to pass the type, and we can say that the query is of a type string. It'll look something like this. Next, we have to define the endpoint that we're calling. So I'll say const endpoint is equal to /discover/movie sort by popularity descending. So this will give us the most popular movies. Then we have to get the response out of that call by saying const response is equal to await fetch. We're going to fetch a specific endpoint with the following options. I'll pass the method of get, so we want to make a get call, and I will also assign the headers to be equal to TMDB config.headers. Finally, we'll check if the response is not okay. So if not response okay, then throw new error, failed to fetch movies. And we can also console log the response.status text to see exactly what went wrong. I'll suppress this TS warning right now because I assume there will be a response.status text that might give us more info. And then if everything is okay, we can extract the data from the response by saying const data is equal to await response.json. And finally, we just want to return the data.results, which contains the actual movies, out from this function. And this would be great. I mean, this works amazingly well for just fetching the most popular movies. You could say fetch popular movies and you would be good to go with this function. But I want to teach you how to make it more modular, how to make it work both for fetching the popular movies as well as to work for fetching the movies that we search for. So if a user heads over and clicks search right here, we actually want to use the same function, not create a duplicate one, that'll fetch the movies based on the user's search query. So what you can do is say that the endpoint is equal to, and then if there is a query, so if query exists, then we can change the endpoint to be equal to /search/movie query is equal to, and now here we can pass over the query like this. But whenever you pass plain strings into a URL, it is always better to encode them, just to make sure that we don't have any weird characters that the browser might not be able to process. So you can write encode URI component and then pass the query into it. This way, we'll be sure that everything is good. And then if we don't have the query, simply search for the latest movies. Now, the final thing we need to do to make this work is also make the bottom one a template string. Why? Because for both of these, we actually want to add the TMDB_config.base URL at the start of them. So everything starts with this base URL, and then we're changing the exact endpoint depending on whether we have the query, and if so, we pass it, or if not, give me all the most popular movies. I think you can now understand a bit more detail of what I meant when I said that we're going to make this reusable and just better configured. And it makes sense because the endpoint is different, but the actual data we're returning from the function is still the same. They are movies. So with that in mind, you have successfully created an account on TMDB, you extracted your own API key for free, and you made a function that fetches the movies, either the most popular ones or the ones that match the user's query. Very soon, we'll put it to use. But just before that, in the next lesson, I'll show you one more optimization that we can make to use the fetch movies functions we created in a more optimized way. In the previous lesson, we implemented this fetch movies function. But before diving into using it, which involves API calls, using the useEffect hook, managing loading and error states, and potentially cluttering our code with repetitive logic, there's a more efficient approach. Instead of repeating the same code for every request, we can improve this process by using something known as a custom hook. This hook will handle fetching the data in a clean, reusable, and scalable way. So let's create a new file within the services folder, and let's call it usefetch.ts. And we can develop that custom hook. This hook will allow us to handle API requests without cluttering the components by abstracting away the logic for fetching the data, managing loading and error states, and it'll even provide us with a way to manually trigger a refetch when needed. Let me show you how it'll look like. We can say const usefetch. Again, notice the keyword use, indicating that it is a hook, and we can make it equal to a function call, and we can make it equal to an arrow function. Now, bear with me for a second. The usefetch hook will accept the fetch function as a parameter, okay? So what can this fetch function be? Well, it can be like fetch movies, or it can be something else, maybe like fetch movie details. Whatever it is, we're gonna pass it into this usefetch call. So it'll look something like this, usefetch fetch movies. We immediately have to let it know that the first parameter will be that fetch function, and we need to define its type. And the type will be a function that returns a promise, and the promise will be of a generic type T. T makes it a generic function, allowing us to later on pass the specific data types that we want the function return to be. It'll all make sense once we start using it. We also have to add this generic T parameter here, and as the second parameter, we'll pass the autofetch and make it equal to true. If you don't understand what this means, specifically this promise generic parameter T, again, don't worry about it. I'll explain it in more detail once we actually start using this function. Great. With that said, this usefetch function will have to work with some kind of data. So we can create a new state called data and set data, which will be equal to the useState hook, and it'll be of a type T or null. You define it right here before we open the function call of this function, and by default, we'll set it to null. Next, we need to define the loading and set loading at the start equal to false, and also the errors. Const error set error is equal to the useState, where the type of that state is either an error or a null by default. Now that we have implemented those different states, let's create a function, const fetch data, which will be equal to an asynchronous function within which we can open up a try and catch block. In the catch, we'll of course get the access to the error. I'll shorten it for ERR, and within it, we can set error. If an error is an instance of error, then I'll just forward the entire error, else I'll just create a new error and pass in a string of an error occurred. And I'll suppress the TypeScript right here for this line by saying tsignore. Then we're gonna also add a finally clause. Finally block of code gets executed either when a try succeeds or a catch finishes. Either way, we wanna set loading to false. But now what we care about the most is dealing with the try block, which means actually fetching the data. First, we're gonna set loading to true because we wanna start the loading action. We're gonna also reset the error to false, or rather null. There is no error. And then we can say const result is equal to await fetch function. So keep in mind that this fetch function is not yet declared. The fetch function will be passed through props, and it can be either the fetch movies function, which we created not that long ago, or maybe another function which we'll create in the future, like fetch movie details, or maybe another function which we'll create soon. In any case, the function we want to call will be passed through as the first parameter to the usefetch hook, and then we'll call it right here, get the results, and simply set them to the data. So set data is equal to result. Also, below this entire fetch data function, we can also have a reset function. So const reset is equal to an error function where we set the data to null, set the loading to false, and set the error to null as well. Finally, I'll also create a use effect hook. And a use effect hook is called when you want to do something at the start of your component load. So in this case, as soon as the component loads, we want to check if auto-fetch is turned on. That means that we want to automatically fetch the data in that case. So if auto-fetch is true, we'll simply call the fetch data function. Finally, hooks have to return something. So I'll return almost everything. The data state, the loading state, the error state, the refetch function, which I'll call fetch data, as well as the reset function. So later on when we use this hook, it is dealing with everything data related. Fetching, loadings, errors, and finally the data that it's returning. So let's say export default use fetch, so that in the next lesson, we can use the use fetch hook, as well as use the fetch movies function, merge them together to be able to fetch and display movies. And we're finally ready to fetch and display the movie data. To do that, let's head over into our homepage, app, tabs, index.tsx. Fetching the data now should be super simple, since we have already done all the hard work of actually implementing scalable, reusable fetching functions that contain all of the necessary data fetching logic. Let me show you what I mean. Instead of handling all the states and everything right here, now we can do just a single thing. Const destructure the data that we're gonna fetch, rename it to movies, and make it equal to the call of the use fetch hook coming from services use fetch. To it, we have to pass a callback function, in this case, fetch movies, which is another one of our functions we created. And to it, we can pass a query, which by default will be set to an empty string. Let me actually put this into multiple lines so you can better see what's happening. There we go. So we're calling the use fetch hook, and to it, we're passing a callback function called fetch movies, to which we pass the query. This query right now is empty, but later on, once we implement search, or once we navigate to the search page, we can fill in the query data. But it doesn't matter if it's empty right now, because you know what happens. Fetch movies, if a query doesn't exist, returns the most popular movies. So we're still good. Now, alongside the movies themselves, back from the use fetch hook, we're also getting the loading, which I can rename to movies loading, and we're also getting back the error state, which I can rename to movies error. And just so it's easier to read it, I'll put it into multiple lines. And there we go. All the data we need nicely contained within a single call. So let's put it to use. Right below the icons logo, we can check whether we're currently loading the movies. So if movies loading, in that case, we can show an activity indicator built right into React Native. It is a self-closing component for which you can define the size. In this case, I'll make it large. The color, which I'll set to hash 0000FF. And you can also define the class name, which I'll set to margin top of 10 and self center. But if we're not loading the movies, then maybe there's an error. So let's check. If movies errors exist, then we will render a piece of text that'll say something like error is equal to movies error (message). And finally, if we're not loading and we don't have an error, we can return a view within which we'll have the search bar and the rest of the content. So basically, I can just copy this view that we had before and put it right here instead of this view that I created. Next, below the search bar, we can create an empty React fragment, and within it, we can display a piece of text that'll say something like latest movies. To be able to see that text, let's give it a class name of text-lg, text-white, font-bold, margin top of 5, and margin bottom of 3. And I'll try to reload the application just to see whether the changes happen. There we go. You can see the latest movies right there. Sometimes you have to manually restart it. Now get ready to use one of the most important React Native components called a flat list. imported from React Native. And let me show you how it works. A pretty cool thing about the flat list is that it accepts a lot of props. So for it to work, you don't have to customize it that much outside of figuring out which props to provide. First of all, we have to provide the data prop. That'll simply be equal to movies. That's the data we're rendering. And then we have to tell it how it will render each item, each one of these movies. First, we can destructure that item, which is a movie itself. And then for each item, we can have an immediate return. What does an immediate return mean? Well, it means that we're not opening up a function block here with curly braces. Instead, we're opening it with parentheses. So whatever we put in here, such as maybe a text element, means that we will automatically return it. So for each movie, let's automatically render an item.title and give it a class name of text-white as well as text-sm. So take a look at that. We get back a list of 20 most popular movies at the time of the recording. Pretty cool, right? Another thing we have to pass into the flat list is the key extractor, which simply helps React Native figure out how many elements they are and where they're positioned. So same as before, we get access to the item and we simply want to take the ID of each one of these movies. Next, we can define the number of columns. In this case, let's make it equal to 3. And then you might need to reload for the changes to take effect because you cannot change the number of columns on the fly. There we go. So now they're showing in 3 different columns. Let's also define a column wrapper style by making it into an object and passing a justify content of flex-start, gap of 20 in between the elements, padding of right 5, margin bottom of 10. So now if we save this, they're going to be positioned a bit more nicely. And we can also pass a general class name to the entire flat list as margin top of 2 and padding bottom of 32. Also, let's say scroll enabled is set to false as our entire view already scrolls by itself. Perfect. So now we're displaying 20 of the most popular movies in the world just by passing the movies array as data into the flat list. Pretty cool, right? And I think you can now get the idea of what I meant when I said that the flat list is super extensible and you can modify everything just by calling different props. Data, render item, key extractor, num columns, whatever we needed to present our data nicely in a list was already there and provided to us through the flat list component props. And you'll find this practice pretty commonly in React Native where the pre-built components are super extensible. You just have to figure out which props to pass. And how can you know? Well, you just Google it, which will bring you to the documentation page. You can check out the example, and then very quickly, you'll be able to see a list of different props that you can pass to it and exactly what each one of these props does. Pretty cool, right? Let me zoom this back in right now. And now that we're fetching the data properly, let's make it look a bit more interesting. Of course, visuals are what's going to change the game. Right now, we are showing just the title, but what if we could show an image for each one of these movies? Just so we don't have to declare it in many places, we'll create a new reusable card component for the movie. So let's create a new file in the components folder, and let's call it moviecard.tsx. Run rnfe to quickly spin up our movie card component. Give it a class name equal to text-white and text-sm. And let's call it right here instead of this simple text element. Instead of that, I'll call the movie card and I'll self-close it like this. Now, we have a similar problem that we had before with the tabs layout, where each movie card now shows exactly the same data. So to be able to make it different, we have to pass the right props to it. So what does it mean in this case? Well, we can simply spread out all of the properties of the item or of the movie. So that way, we'll be able to extract them directly within the movie card. So let's head over into the movie card and let's accept all of the props that we have passed into it, such as the ID, the poster_path, the title, And where am I getting all of these from? Well, remember, we already made a mock response before, and TMDB gave us back exactly the data that we're getting, such as the poster path, overview, title, and more. So let's get it. Vote_average, as well as the release date. And these will be of a type movie, which we declared before under interfaces. So we already know what each movie has. Now we want to make each one of these cards clickable, because once we click it, we want to go to the movie details page. So I'll make it into a link. And this link, of course, has to be imported from Expo router. It'll have an href of /movie/ID and as child. As child simply means that the card that is inside of the link will actually be the thing that's clickable. In this case, we'll make it a touchable opacity. So like a card is technically a clickable button in this case, coming from React Native. We can give it a class name equal to W-30%. So each card takes only 30% of the screen. And within it, let's first render an image. This image will have a source equal to an object where the URI is. We can check if the poster path exists. If it does, then we'll set it to be equal to https://image.tmdb.org/t/p/w500 and then poster path like this. Else, if we don't have a poster path, we can render just a placeholder. So it'll be a string of https://placehold.co/600 by 400 /1A1A1A/FFFFFF.png. Sorry for spelling out the entire URL. Just thought it would be the simplest way to share it with you. Now reload your application, and let's also give this image a class name of W-full, age-52, and the rounded -LG for the rounded corners. We can also give it a resize mode equal to cover. Right below that image, still within the touchable opacity, let's also render a piece of text that will simply render the movie title. And we can give it a class name of text-sm, font-bold, text-white, and margin top of 2. And there we go. Once again, you can see all of these movies. But hey, where is the poster? Why can't we see the images? Well, let's first console log the poster path to see whether we're getting back the paths of those movies. So the URLs are coming back, but hey, where is the poster? Why can't we see the images? Well, for the image to be displayed, we need to give it a URL, which I do believe we're getting as the titles are here, so the poster should be too. But images also need a width and a height. And I thought that I was providing a width of 100% and a height of about 208 pixels. So why is it not getting applied? Well, if you head over into your tailwind.config.js, you'll see that we're saying that only the app folders and files will actually include Tailwind styles. But we have to do the same thing for the components. So right here, as the second part of the content, I can add a second string and say /components, and then also target all of the components. And immediately, that'll allow us to apply Tailwind styles within our components folder, and immediately the images will appear. So this is looking absolutely amazing, and it is so nice to be able to scroll with my thumb across all of these movies. And since we're using touchable opacities, you can see as I hover over them, it appears as they are clickable. All of this is happening natively within our mobile application. Beautiful. For me, I see some of the movies that are currently popular. If you're watching this video later on, for you, some different ones might be. So in the comments down below, let me know what is the popular movie from your list that you like. And with that said, we also have one little error right here saying that the path of movie / is not a valid path. And it's actually pretty amazing that React Native can understand that we don't have a movie ID path. We only have movies, plural. So as soon as we change it, that's working. Great. So now that we're showing the image and the title, already this is looking amazing, but we might as well show some more information. So let me open up another view right here and give it a class name of flex-row, items-center, justify-start, and a gap of X, meaning horizontal only, of 1. Within it, we can display another image, but this time a much simpler one, just coming from icons, which is coming from constants, dot star. So we want to display the number of stars for each one of these with a class name equal to size is set to 4. And below it, we can render a piece of text that'll round up the current score. So I can use the math.round, vote average divided by 2. Because it goes up to 10, we want to have it up to 5. So if we do this and reload our application, the changes are still not getting applied. So sometimes you might need to just reload your application by pressing Ctrl+C and then run npx expo start one more time, and then press R to fully reload it. But why can't we see the star yet? Oh, it's not src in React Native. It's source. Oh, it's those little gotchas, right? That always get you. There are some small differences between React and React Native, so be careful. But thankfully, there aren't many. Let's also give this text a class name of text-xs, extra small, text-white, and font-bold, as well as uppercase. So now we can show the rating right here. Below this view, let's render another view. This one will have a class name equal to flex-row, items-center, and justify-between. And within it, we can render a piece of text that'll have a class name equal to text-xs, text-light-300, font-medium, and a margin top of 1. And within it, we can render the release date, but it'll be too long like this, so we can just split it by saying $.split based on the dashes, and we can only take the first part of the dash, which is the year. We just care about when this movie was released. And below this piece of text, we can render another that will simply say movie, and we can give it a class name equal to text-xs, font-medium, text-light-300, and uppercase. And if you save it, it'll now say movie. This is cool to have later on in case maybe some are not movies, but maybe TV shows, so you can specify which one it is. But for now, I will simply comment it out. And I also want to make sure that the title takes only one row, because if it doesn't, that can mess up with the view. So where we have the title, that's going to be right here under this text property, we don't have to shorten the string. React Native's text element comes with a pre-built number of lines prop, where you can say that this text should only take one line. And immediately, you can see that it is shortened to just a single line. Looking great. With that in mind, I invite you to further style this card. Right now, we're just showing the title, the profile photo, the rating, and the year. But as you know, we're getting back so much more data about each one of these movies. So you can go ahead and utilize something else, like the original language, or the popularity, or even show the overview right here. So feel free to play with it and try to further customize this card. I would suggest with simply destructuring some more props from right here and then using them within your JSX. But don't worry about it too much, because very soon we'll be able to show all of the details about a movie within our movie details page. So keeping that in mind, I am now more than happy with how our homepage is looking. And if we head back to the index.tsx, you can see that we're fetching back all the movies. But now what we can do is, for the time being, manually change the query to see whether our function works for fetches where we're searching for a specific movie. So if I type something like Iron Man and click save, you can see that it'll reload and show all of the movies that match that search term. Pretty cool, right? And if I bring it back, we're back to where we were. It's not that hard, right? Once you understand the basics, using it the next time will feel much easier. But this was just one example of creating a custom hook for fetching data. You can create custom hooks for many other things, like handling forms, like React Hook Form, managing themes, or storing data in local storage. You can do whatever you want. But don't get me wrong, you don't always need to create your own hooks, only when it really makes sense to do so. Because React 19 comes with a lot of pre-built hook, like the use hook. Yep, it's only use like this, and it does some pretty cool things. There's also the use action state, use form state, use transition, which make working with forms and requests much easier. And I actually explain all of these in detail with real examples and even better projects within the new React Native course that I'm right now building for JS Mastery Pro. It's a new learning platform where you can learn lesson by lesson with real examples and even better projects. So go ahead and check it out. I'll leave the link in the description. But with that, let's go ahead and develop the search. So we no longer have to manually pass the query right here. Instead, we can use the actual search page and then pass over real values. Great job so far. The app is already looking amazing, but now we'll make it stand out with even better functionalities. Similar to what we did on the home screen, now is the time to develop the search screen. So let's open up our File Explorer and head over into tabs search.tsx. Now we could totally just copy the entire index.tsx and just paste it over into the search. But I want to take the time to guide you through the process of building it out one more time, because although it'll be very similar, there will be some differences here, and it's just a beautiful chance to recap everything we've learned so far, just to make sure you totally get it. I've made the font a bit smaller, just so you can nicely see everything, and we are ready to get started. First, this view that we're wrapping everything with will have a class name of flex-1 and bg-primary, just so we don't have to stare at that blank screen anymore. Next, within it, I'll display another image, which I'll import from React Native, and it'll have a source equal to images coming from constants .bg, so this is our background, with a class name of flex-1, absolute, w full, and z of 0, as well as a resize mode equal to cover, similar to as on the homepage. Next, in this case, instead of wrapping everything with the scroll view as we did on the index, here we don't want to scroll the entire view because the search bar always has to remain on top. So here, I will actually just render a flat list, pass the movies to it, and pass the similar render item as before, where we will destructure each individual movie, and for each one, we'll simply render a movie card, to which we will spread the item property, or in this case, the movie itself. So let me put these props in a new line so it's easier to see, and we are rendering this movie card right here. There we go. Now, of course, where are these movies coming from? Well, this part we can definitely grab from the index. We're getting them by simply calling our use fetch movies. This is a custom hook we already created. We might as well grab this use router at the top. We'll surely need to use it. And I'll paste it right here at the top of our search. Make sure to also get all the imports, such as this movie card right here. And now if we go back to the search, you'll see we have, well, something, right? A broken layout so far. Next, as before, we need a key extractor to let React Native which ID does each one of these elements have. And here we can just say that each one will get it from item.id.toString. We'll also render a class name and give it a padding x of 5, so some spacing. A number of columns will be set to 3 as before, and we have to reload our application for the changes to take effect. There we go. This is a bit better. As well as we can provide the column wrapper style, which will be an object that'll say justify content is equal to center, a gap of 16 in between the elements, as well as a margin vertical to create some space for the search bar of 16 as well. We can also render the content container style as before, which will simply have a padding bottom of something like 100. And now bear with me. Before, we displayed the search bar at the top of the flat list because we were able to scroll the whole thing. We didn't need to see the search bar. But in this case, we'll render the search bar as a part of the flat list. So I'll do that with yet another special flat list prop called list header component. I'll open up an empty React fragment, and whatever you put within it will be displayed at the top of our list. So let me say something like view, and this view will have a class name of w-full, flex-row, justify-center, margin top of 20, and items-center. And within it, we can display our logo. That'll be an image with a source equal to icons. Make sure to import them from icons constants. .logo with a class name of w12 and h10. So now we get the logo at the top. As I promised, whatever you put within the list header component, even though it's just a part of the flat list, it'll actually show on top, as that's what this component does, rendered at the top of all the items. Now, below the view that's wrapping the image, we can render another view. This one will have a class name equal to margin y of 5. And here we can render the search bar coming from components search bar. And we can give it a placeholder of something like search movies, ... There we go. It appeared right on top. Right below the view, we can also check whether we are currently loading. So I'll say something like movies loading. And if movies are loading, then we can show an activity indicator with a size is equal to large, a color is equal to #0000FF, and a class name equal to margin y of 3. So now we have to get access to this movies loading, and we're getting it right here through this useFetch call. But I have to spell it properly. The L in loading is uppercased. Now, if we go back, if you're paying close attention, you would have been able to see the loading for a short period of time. But if we don't have a loading, then it is possible that we might have some kind of an error. So I'll say if movies error, in that case, we can render just a single piece of text that'll have a class name of text-red-500, padding x of 5, and margin y of 3. And the text will say error, and then we'll render the movies error dot message. No errors for now. And finally, below it, I'll open another dynamic block of code. And if we're neither loading nor there is an error, then we can take a look into the current search term. Let's say that the search term right now is hard-coded, search term, dot trim, so we want to trim any extra spaces. And if the search query exists as well, we want to check if there are any movies dot length. So movies dot length for that search term. And if that is greater than 0, in that case, we can finally return a piece of text. And this piece of text will say search results for. We can put an empty string right here and then render another piece of text that'll say search term. And I'll style the second piece of text by giving it a text-accent class name. And I'll style the first piece of text by giving it a class name of text-XL, text-white, and font-bold. Oh, and now I see that I call this just loading an error instead of movies errors and movies loading. So you know what? It might be just simpler to call it like that. It makes sense that we're loading the movies. So I'll just not rename the loading and the error to loading movies and loading error. I'll just keep them as loading and error. So here I can now change the movies loading to loading and error to error. Same thing right here. And now this message right here makes sense. If there is no loading and no error and search term exists, and if movies.length is greater than 0, well, then display this piece of text. So now if you go back, you can see search results for search term. So let's make it dynamic. Right at the top of this component, I'll create another use state. We don't need the router in this case. So let me delete it. And let me define a use state snippet called search query, set search query at the start equal to an empty string. Also, when calling these movies, in this case, I want to pass a second parameter to the useFetch function of false, because in this case, we don't want to auto fetch. We just want to let the user actually trigger the fetch on search. So that's why we initially extended this custom hook to allow for auto fetch when we're on the home page, or to disallow it when we want the user to search first. And of course, we can now put this search query to use and say, give me the movies where the query matches the query that the user currently searched for. So now that we have access to the search query, right below, we can replace this big search term with search query.trim. And also below, where we're saying search term, we can render the actual search query. So now if I open up my keyboard by clicking on the list and I start typing, you'll see nothing is yet changing. And that's because we haven't passed proper values into the search bar. So to the search bar, alongside the placeholder, we also have to pass the value equal to search query, as well as on change text equal to a callback function where we simply set query or set search query to be equal to text that is coming right here through props. And we can set the type of this search to a string. But as you can see, the search bar is still not accepting the value prop. So let's head into it and let's implement it. I'll simply say also accept the value, and the value will be of a type string. Once you do accept it, simply forward it here, value, and also forward the on change text. I believe that's how we called it, on change text. So it'll be a function that doesn't return anything, void. And now we can make that on change text right here instead of this dummy callback function. If we now do that, looks like I didn't properly define the type. Here, we're getting something as the first parameter, and it is text of a type string. So if I fix that, you can see that the error goes away. And now, if I start typing something like Batman, you can see that the search results change immediately right here below. I can type Marvel, that works as well. It works incredibly well. And as soon as I delete it, the search results go away. Great. But finally, what matters most is rendering the movies that match that search term. So I'll create a new use effect right here below. This use effect will have a callback function and a dependency array. We want to recall it every time that the search query changes. So I'll say if search query dot trim exists. So if there is something that the user has searched for, then await, and as a return value of the fetch, we're also getting access to the refetch function, which we can rename to load movies, because that's exactly what it does. And also we get access to reset. So now, if there is a search term, whenever the search query changes, just await load movies like this, else simply reset the state. And since we're using await right here, we'll have to wrap this into an asynchronous function. So I'll say const func, and I'll make it equal to an asynchronous function that then has this if within it. That'll look something like this. And now we can call this function just below. If I do that, initially you'll see no movies. But if I search for Iron Man, you can see all the movies that match that search term. And if you start deleting it, you can see that we get back to, well, I think we got back to whatever the letter was there before we actually removed it. So this is the letter I movies. And then, yeah, if we remove it, we have nothing. Now there's a couple of problems with this. And that is that, let's say that I want to type a normal movie name, like Iron Man. Like what happened here is that the app made a request to the API for every single letter that I type. That is a lot of different requests. And for each one, we're getting many movies, but hey, I just wanted to see the ones that I get back once I type the entire search term. So to not overload our application with too many API requests for every single keystroke, what we need to do is something called debouncing. We can debounce a search term by wrapping it into a timeout function. So I'll say const timeout ID is equal to set timeout, and then we have this function, and we can close it here as well. And in this case, you don't have to call it, but we do have to give it a second parameter, which is a number of milliseconds of how long it'll wait for the next keystroke. I'll explain what that means soon. And now we can return a callback function where we can clear the timeout with that specific timeout ID. This is just to make our application work more efficiently. We need to clear out all the timeouts. But with that said, check this out. If I type very quickly, you'll see that as long as I continue typing, no request will be made. But as soon as I stop typing for 500 milliseconds, which is half a second, immediately I'll get the results. This means that a user that types fast can only make a single request and get the data they would usually get as well. But this time in a single request instead of a dozen. Great. But now what happens if I search for something that just doesn't exist? We're left with a completely empty screen, something that you never want to see within your application. You always want to show some kind of an empty state. And believe it or not, once again, I think you can now start seeing what I was saying from the start. In React Native components, there is a prop for everything. From the data, render item, key extractor, to defining how a header will look like, to even defining how an empty state will look like. Yep, list empty state is a valid flat list prop that allows us to specify what the user will see if there's nothing in the list. So I'll say if there is no loading, and if there is no error, in that case, and of course if we're empty, we'll show a view with a class name equal to margin top of 10 and padding x of 5, a text element with a class name of text-center and text-gray 500, and within it we can say search query dot trim. If the search query exists, we'll say no movies found. But if a search query doesn't exist, we'll say search for a movie. And of course, if there is a loading on error, we'll just return null for the empty list component because we want to display something else. So currently, we get no movies found. And if you wanted to, you could display a nice illustration right here and say, go ahead and search for something cool, or here's a movie recommendation that you might want to watch based on your history. There's a lot of things you can do on empty states, but hopefully the users won't be staring at this for too long as they're going to put our search to use. Great. So in this lesson, we recapped what it means to create a React Native screen that uses our custom hook, fetches data from a third-party API, changes it based on the search query that the user types in using their keyboard, as well as how to debounce a search term to optimize it further and not make too many requests, and finally, how to use a flat list component with all of its props to properly render the layout. Doesn't get much better than this. Now, in the next lesson, we'll bring our app to the next level. We'll implement an algorithm that displays trending movies. So I'm not talking popular or searched, but rather show the movies that match what the users within our app are searching for. That can kind of give you an idea of who your users are and how we can further customize the app. So let me show you how to implement it in the next lesson. So, hey, custom algorithm, right? Well, technically, yes. You'll implement a feature that displays the movies that the users are searching for within the app. To be more specific, the more frequently a specific search is performed by multiple users, the higher its trending status becomes. This requires tracking and analyzing search patterns over time. For example, if many users search for Avengers, that search term becomes trending. And to track and analyze these searches, we need a place to store that data permanently. This is where a database comes into the picture. It keeps all the information organized and accessible. And traditionally, implementing this would mean building a full stack application. You'd have to create a server, set up a database, connect them, host everything together, and then integrate it into your React Native project. While this approach works, it can be a lot of effort and requires diving into backend development, which is a whole different area of expertise. An easier way to get backend functionality without starting from scratch is using a backend as a service platform. It'll provide you with APIs and tools to let you store your data, manage auth, and more without needing in-depth backend knowledge. In this course, I'll use Appwrite because it's simple, open source, and free to use. Plus, it'll save us from diving headfirst into backend work when we really just want to focus on making a React Native app great. So click the link in the description and create your account, and then head over to your console. If you haven't already, create your project or just head over into the one you already created and copy its ID. Back within your app, head over into our .env file, and let's create our second environment variable, Expo public Appwrite project ID, and simply paste the one you just copied. Now we'll have to set up a platform for our project. In this case, Appwrite already comes with React Native, so let's select it. And you'll have to choose Android or iOS and give it a name. I'll do JSM movie app, and as the bundle ID, you can type something like com.jsm.movie app like this and click next. It'll give you some dependencies you want to install. So copy them, open up your second terminal, and paste them right here to install Appwrite. Click next. Next one more time because we'll do this together, and go to the dashboard. And now we can set up the rest of the backend together, specifically create a database and some collections within it. So let's do that next. Just to give us some extra space to work with, I have hidden my mobile screen from here for now, and I'll create our first database. I'll call it movies and create. As soon as you create it, you'll be given a database ID. Copy it and store it within your editor within the env file as expo public Appwrite database ID. Next, create a new collection within that database. Call it metrics. You'll also be given the ID of the metrics collection, so copy it and paste it as the expo public Appwrite collection ID and paste it. Now you'll want to create different attributes for the metrics collection. The first one will be a string of search term. So let's say search term. Let's say that it can have maybe 1,000 characters, and let's make it required. After that, we'll do an integer of count. It won't be required, and we don't need to enter the min and max size, but the default can be set to 0. So this is how many times has a user searched for each specific movie, or rather for a specific search term. Let's also create another attribute of a type URL and call it poster_URL. I'll make it required. So we can store the poster of the movie that people are searching for. We can also save an integer called movie_ID, and I'll make it required. And finally, we want to save the title of the movie people are searching for. I'll enter the size of 1,000, better to have more than less, and I'll make it required. Great. And now we just want to make sure that we give this collection all the necessary permissions to be able to update it. So head over to Settings, scroll down to Permissions, and click Any, and tick Create, Read, Update, and Delete. This is the easiest way to do it, just to make sure that we don't have any permission errors. Now, we just want to make sure that we can read any kind of value from Appwrite. So, to be able to do it, let's create a new file within Services, and let's call it appwrite.ts. Within it, we'll implement two functions. The first function will track the searches made by a user. It'll have to accept two different params. So let's code it out. Export const update search count. And let's make it equal to an asynchronous function that accepts two different props. The query of a type string, so what the user is searching for, and then the first movie that matches that search query. So I'll say movie of a type movie. Then we have to perform a couple of steps. We have to call the Appwrite API to browse the database and check if a document already exists for the given search term. So check if a record of that search has already been stored. Then, if a document is found, simply increment the search count field. But if no document is found, in that case, it means that it's a new search term, so we want to create a new document in Appwrite database, and then we want to initialize its count to 1. So how would that look in practice? Well, something like this. First, we want to check everything that we have in our Appwrite database by saying const result is equal to await, and now we have to call the Appwrite database. But before calling it, we actually have to set it up to be able to make that call. That looks something like this. We can first define our environment variables by saying const database underscore ID is equal to the variable coming from environment variables process.env.expo public Appwrite database ID. And make sure you don't have a typo like I do right here. And at the end of that line, you can add an exclamation mark, which tells TypeScript that we know that this value will be there, because it cannot know what we have within our envs, but we do know it. And I'll also create another one. Const collection ID will be equal to process.env.expo public Appwrite collection ID. Just like this. Now we can set up a new Appwrite client. Const client is equal to new client. And make sure to import this client coming from React Native Appwrite. And we want to call a method called setEndpoint on it, to which we want to pass the default Appwrite endpoint, https://cloud.appwrite.io/v1, and we want to choose our project by passing the ID of our project, that is the process.env.expo public Appwrite project ID. Perfect. So now we have our Appwrite client, and we are ready to set up our database instance belonging to that Appwrite client by saying const database is equal to new databases. This is coming from Appwrite, so make sure to import it. And to it, you can pass the client that we want to initialize this database on. Once you do that, we can go back to where we were. Result is equal to await database dot list documents, and you want to pass in a couple of things. First is the database ID within which we want to list the documents. Then we have to specify within which collection do we want to fetch it, collection ID. And then you want to pass the actual query, so query dot equal, and we want to match the search term with the query that the user is currently passing. And of course, this query is also coming from React Native Appwrite. Oh, and make sure to put it within an array, not within an object, because there can be multiple queries or multiple criteria that we're searching or listing the items by. So let's go ahead and console log the result. And before we try to get back any result, let's make sure to reload our application by stopping it from running and then rerunning npx expo start. When you change your environment variables, you might want to always reload it just to make sure the changes are taken into account. So I ran the application, and now back on the search page, we want to call this update search count function. So let's head over into search within tabs, and I'll add it for now just here at the top of this use effect. Call the update search count and make sure to import it from services Appwrite. If you do it properly and navigate over to the search function, you won't be able to see anything yet. But if you pass the search query into the update search count function, as well as the movies 0, so the first movie that you get back for that search query, you'll see that you'll get back documents 0, total 0, which means that we're successfully accessing the Appwrite database, but there's nothing to be fetched yet. This is good. This is the only thing we wanted to see for now. And if you don't yet see it, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Now we'll actually create our first document, and then we'll be able to fetch it. So now we have to check if a record of that search has already been stored. So I'll say if result.documents.length is greater than 0, then we want to search for the existing movie. So const existing movie is equal to result.documents 0. So this is the top movie that shows for that search term. In that case, we want to say await database.update document. So if the movie already exists, and we need to pass it the database ID to be able to know within which database to update, within which collection to update, and then finally the ID that we want to update. That's going to be existing movie.$ID. And finally, what do we want to change? Well, we want to set the count to be equal to existing movie.count plus 1, because some other user has already searched for it before. Else, if a movie doesn't yet exist, then we can just create that metric by saying await database.create document within our database ID, within this specific collection ID, and we also want to give it a unique ID. So say ID and import it from React Native Appwrite .unique. So we're now creating a new document in our Appwrite database that will allow us to store the searches that people have entered. And we can then define an object of how that record or document in the database will look like. And we can say search term will be equal to query movie_ID. So the first movie that shows up will be the movie.id. The count will be set to 1 by default. And the poster URL of that movie will be equal to https://image.tmdb.org/t/p/w500, and then we append the movie.poster path, similar to what we did on the homepage, or rather in the movie card. And we can put all of this within a try block, everything from where we're trying to get this result. Try to do this, everything we have here. So let me close it. There we go. And then catch, if something goes wrong, well, that must mean that we have an error. So simply console.log the error message, as well as throw the error. Great. So with this code, we should be successfully updating the Appwrite database to store the metric of what the user has searched. So let's head back over into the search, and right below where we say await load movies, that means that the search has actually been made. Check if movies (length) is greater than 0, and if movies (0) exists, Then we can await, update search count, pass the search query, as well as the movies 0. If I zoom it out, that'll look something like this. So now let me show you how that works. I'll go ahead and search for something like Avengers. And the first movie that shows up is Avengers Infinity War. I'll search one more time for Iron Man, for example. I'm on a roll with these superhero movies. And again, please let me know which movies do you like. You can let me know in the comments below this lesson. And I'll search for Avengers one more time, just to replicate as if some other user has searched for that search term as well. Now we can head back over into the database, head into movies, metrics. Oh, and I don't see any documents yet. That's interesting. Oh, check this out. Missing required attribute title. So back in Appwrite, where we're creating a new document, we want to actually pass the title equal to movie.title, so we can store that as well. Oh, that was my bad, but thankfully we were getting some logs back. Now, if I go ahead and restart this search and go back and reload, immediately a new document has been added to the database. Avengers Count 1 with the stored poster URL, the movie ID, and the title. So this means that right now this is the top searched movie. Now, if I go ahead and search for something like Avatar and reload right here, check this out. In our permanent data storage, we're now getting back 2 different documents. And now if another user goes ahead and searches for Avengers, oh, I misspelled it, that's okay. There we go. Now this count should update to 2. Oh, but it didn't. It is still 1. But let me try one more time. Maybe it didn't send out the request. I'll remove one S, Avenger, and I'll re-add it right now to repeat that search. And if I reload, you can see that even the Avenger and then Avengers gets added. So we have the count of 2. If I remove it, and if I search for it one more time and reload, now we're looking at the count of 3. This is great. It means we're actually storing the data of the top trending movies that the users are searching for within our app. So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and display them at the top. In this lesson, we'll first create a function that queries the Appwrite database to retrieve the top movies our users have searched for. And then we'll display it in a cool Netflix-like carousel at the top. So first things first, let's collapse this update search count function. I'll zoom out a bit. And right beneath it, create a new function, export const get trending movies. It'll be equal to an asynchronous function. And this one doesn't have to get any props, but it'll just return a single promise of trending movie array, just like this, or undefined in case something goes wrong. So here we can open up a try and catch block. In the catch, if there's an error, we'll simply console log that error and return undefined. But in the try, we'll actually try to list out those documents. And we have already done that at the top of the update search count, because to update, we first have to fetch them. So let me copy this starting part and paste it here. Const result is equal to await database.listDocuments, database ID, collection ID, and this time I'll say query.limit to 5, so we only want to get the first 5 elements, and query.order descending based on the count field. So we only want to show the top 5 movies that people have searched for, sorted by the count. And we can say return result.documents. Just to make TypeScript happy, we can say as unknown as trending movie array. This way, TypeScript will know exactly what we're returning. Next, we can call this function within our homepage. So head over into index.tsx. I'll zoom it out once again so you can see a bit better. And right above the first useFetch call, we're going to add the second. const. We know how it works. You can call it useFetch, but this time to it, we're gonna pass the get trending movies instead of fetch movies. And we get back the same things. The data, which this time we can rename to trending movies. The loading, which we can rename to trending loading, as well as the error, which we can rename to trending error. Now, just below where we have the activity indicator, we can say if movies loading or trending loading. And same for the error, if there is movies error or if there is trending error, show an error. That error can be movies error, or maybe it is trending error, question mark dot message. Here to the search bar, we don't have to pass the value because we're searching within the search page. So we can make this value optional right here. And what else is optional? On press placeholder, what are we missing? On change text. Yeah, we don't need it right here in the home page. Next, right below the search bar, I'll say if trending movies exist, so if trending movies, then show a view. This view will have a class name equal to margin top of 10, and will render a text element that'll say trending movies. Of course, let's go ahead and give it a class name so we can see it of text-lg, as well as text-white, font-bold, and margin bottom of 3. Let's open up our terminal and reload the app just to see where we are. Sometimes it gets stuck, so you have to reload it. You know that by now, don't you? And now you can see trending movies title right here below the search. So how are we going to render the trending movies? Well, believe it or not, it's going to be a new flat list to which we can pass the trending movies as the data. And I'll pass the render item to be equal to, as before, we'll destructure the item as well as the index from this function. And then for each item, for now, I'll simply return the item.title. But of course, we have to put it within a text. So let me actually expand this and return a text element within which I'll render the item.title. And let's give it a class name equal to text-white text-sm, just so we can see it. Now, if we properly close this flat list, you'll be able to see 3 top movies, Avengers Infinity War 3 times. Let's style it a bit by giving it a class name of margin bottom of 4 and margin top of 3. And I'll put each one of these props in a new line, just so it's easier to see what's happening. There we go. Data, render item, and then we render a text. Below render item, we'll have the key extractor. It is a mandatory thing where we get access to the item, and the ID will be coming from item.movie_ID.toString. And currently, the top 3 movies all seem to be Avengers Infinity War. I guess that's because for all 3 of these, it saved that as the title. Let me actually delete those documents, and let's try it one more time. Now, there should be no latest movies. So now, if I reload my application once again, right off the bat, you'll see an error right here saying that virtualized lists should never be nested inside plain scroll views with the same orientation because it can break windowing and other functionality. What this means is that we cannot have, at least not the list with the same orientation. But don't worry about that for now, because very soon we'll change the orientation of this flat list to horizontal, because that'll make it look more like this. So for now, if I go back to my app, go to search, and try with something like avatar, and then I delete that and maybe search for alien. Okay, and now if I go back to Appwrite, looks like the metrics are not getting added. So let's debug it together. I love it when something obvious doesn't work when I'm recording, because it gives me the opportunity to go back into the code, and I think that sometimes you can learn more that way than just watching me code everything out, because you can see exactly how I would approach the debugging process. First, we have to ask ourselves, where is the error coming from? In this case, we know that the documents are not getting added to the Appwrite database, so we have to ask ourselves, where is that within our code? And that is within the search page. So if you head over to the search page, you'll see that we have a single use effect. Now, within this use effect, we have both await load movies as well as update search count. And these two can race together and we never get back the meaningful results. So we have to split them into two separate use effects. So I'll copy this if statement, and within this first use effect that gets executed whenever the search query gets changed, here we just want to await load movies. But in the second one that I'll create right now, use effect, where we have a callback function, this one will change whenever the movies themselves change. And here we want to check if movies.length is greater than 0, and if movie first exists, then we want to open up a code block here, and we can simply call the update search count without the use effect like this. Now, if we go ahead and search for something like Avatar, we'll get back the movies. I'll go ahead and search for something like, let's do Cats. There we go. And if I head back to Appwrite, you'll see that we have two different movies stored right here. We might as well go for the third one. So I'll go with Iron Man. There we go. Looking good. And if I reload, it gets saved. And of course, what we care about is what if another user searches for a similar movie. So if another user searches for Avatar, for example, there we go. Does the count get updated? And this time it does. So now if we go back to the home page and head back over here, where we're trying to show a flat list of the top movies, let me just make sure to reload the page. You can see that right here, we get 3 different movies: Avatar, Cats, and Iron Man, which is great. That means that our trending functionality is kind of working. But of course, we have to improve it further. Check this out. We can pass just a single prop called horizontal, and if you just pass it like this and save it, immediately the orientation will change to horizontal. We can also say shows horizontal scroll indicator and set it to false. And we can also render the item separator component, and I'll make it equal to a simple view that is self-closing and has a class name equal to W of 4. Now we can see that this looks a bit better. Oh, and this latest movies was supposed to be just above the other flat list, not this one. So I'll go below this one, and here I can paste it. It says latest movies, and right here at the top, we have trending movies. Great. But of course, we don't just want to show 3 pieces of text. We want to show full-on cards that look like this with these top trending numbers. So to do that, let's create a new component in the components folder, and let me call it trending card.tsx. Run rnfe to quickly create it. And now, instead of this text where we're rendering the item title, we can render the trending card. Just like this, a self-closing trending card component to which we can pass over the movie equal to item. This is an alternative way of just spreading everything out. Sometimes this is preferable because then you can console log the entire movie itself and then know what properties does it have. And let's also pass the index of that movie equal to index so we can show that number. Now let's head over into the trending card and let's get it implemented. As with the cards before, I'll wrap this card with a link because we want to make sure that the entire card is clickable and that it leads to the movie details page. So I'll add an href of /movies/movie_ID, and I'll say as child because we want the entire touchable opacity to be clickable. So it'll inherit link properties. Now, where is this movie ID coming from? Well, we can destructure the movie right here from props. And from the movie, we can further destructure the movie ID, the title, and the poster URL. And outside of this movie destructuring, we can also get the index. And we can say that all of these are of a type trending card props. Now, within each link, let's render a touchable opacity. it'll have a class name equal to W-32, relative, and padding left of 5. And immediately within it, we can render an image. This image will have a source equal to URI is poster underscore URL, a class name equal to W32, H48, and rounded dash LG, with a resize mode equal to cover. And there we go. Now you can see the cover photos or the posters for the top 3 searched movies. Right below it, I'll render another view, and this view will be absolutely positioned. So I'll give it a class name of absolute. That's because it'll serve as an overlay over the poster. So somewhere at the bottom left, we want to show that number 1, 2, 3. So I'll say bottom dash 9 minus left dash 3.5, padding X of 2, padding Y of 1, and the rounded dash full. And now within it, we want to achieve some kind of a masked layout. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but the number here will be a bit masked, like it is under some kind of a darker mask, like it'll have a slight gradient. And we can do that using a package called masked view. This one right here has about 265,000 downloads. And as the package says, it creates a masked view where the text appears as a cutout over an image. So let's simply copy the installation command. That is npm install at React Native mask view / mask dash view. While it is installing, we can put it to use. Right here within this view, I'll create another masked view, and you have to provide a mask element. In this case, it'll be a single piece of text. So I'll do it right here. Text, inside of which I'll render the index +1. So that we don't start at 0, we start at 1. Of course, I'll give this index a class name equal to font-bold, text-white, and text-6XL. We want to make it extra large. Let's fix the class name spelling right here. And within the mask view, I will render the image that'll have a source equal to images coming from constants dot ranking gradient with a class name of size-14 and a resize mode set to cover. Now let's fix a typo where we have it. There we go. I think we're good. And take a look at these numbers right here. Looking good. 1, 2, 3. And if you try scrolling, you'll see that this one has a horizontal scroll, whereas you can scroll the entire page up and down. So before, we had that virtualized list error because we had 2 vertical lists in the same file, or in the same screen, should I say. But now one is horizontal and one is vertical, so we're good. Now, just below this view, not the mask view, but the other one, we can render a piece of text. That'll simply render the title of the movie, and it'll have a class name equal to text-sm, font-bold, margin top of 2, and text-light 200. And we can also make it take 2 lines maximum. So number of lines, 2. And with that, you have implemented this trending card layout, which is looking great. So if we go back to the index, no warnings or errors here. And if I go ahead and search for a new movie like Avengers, there we go, and go back to home and reload. You have to keep in mind this search functionality update is not something that has to happen in real time. When you open the app again, you'll be able to see all the new searches that people have made. And there we go, a 4th number appeared right here, Avengers. That is perfect. And the more users search for the same movies, the higher they will rank. Wonderful. Now you have not only implemented the typical API fetch call, but also implemented a backend as a service tool that allowed us to store a persistent data within a database that we use to then show the top trending movies. Great job. Oh, and now that everything is looking so good, we might as well make it a real mobile app by hiding the time and the battery percentage. No need to show it here within our movie app. And even though having it here is totally fine, having it within our movie details page, which we will code next, is not ideal. Because if the poster is very light or very dark, depending on your theme, these numbers will not be visible at all, and they would just clutter the poster image. So to hide them, you can head over into our app_layout. It is this layout right here, the primary one, not the tabs one. And right below the stack, you can say StatusBar, import from React Native, and simply give it a hidden property set to true. If you save it and open up your terminal, you'll see that the layout children must be of type screen and all other children are ignored. That's why this status bar is not taking effect. So what you have to do instead is wrap everything with an empty React fragment, just like this, and then right next to the stack, or on top of it, in other words, you can save it, and there we go, it gets hidden away. Immediately the app looks so much cleaner as the time and battery are not impacting our view. Looking great. And all of these are just fundamentals of React Native. Everything from flat lists to layouts to knowing how to hide the status bar if you need to. But this is just the beginning. There's always more to learn, bigger projects to build, and exciting things to ship to production. So if you want to apply some of the knowledge you've gotten today to practical production level, check out JS Mastery Pro, where I dive deeper into JavaScript, React, React Native, Next.js, and more. And the best part is that it is a subscription-based model, which means that it is more accessible to get started, and you can always learn something new every month. So I'll see you in there, as it is the new biggest chapter of JavaScript Mastery. But with that said, I do want to give you a glimpse of the kind of optimizations that we do on the production level. So in the next lesson, I'll show you one big mistake that we've made in our homepage. Yep, it is hidden right here within this file, but understanding it requires reading a lot of docs, and fixing it, well, I'll show you how to do it in the next lesson. But just before I show you how to tweak that little homepage optimization, I want to make sure that we focus on the movie details page. We've been staring at the search results and the homepage for such a long time, even the trending movies right now, but we were never able to fetch and show all the movie details. So let's do that next. First, we have to create a function to gather all the movie information. So head over into Services, API.ts, and right below Fetch Movies, we want to create a new function, export const fetch movie details. It'll be equal to an asynchronous function that simply accepts a movie ID of a type string, which will return a promise that'll ultimately resolve into movie details. And now we can open up the function block. I'll open up a try and catch block. In the catch, you know the drill. If there is an error, simply console log that error and throw it, just so we can catch it somewhere else. And in the try, we can make a fetch request similar to the one we made above, but this time to a different endpoint. So let's say const response is equal to await fetch. And now we can form the URL by first getting to the TMDB config dot base URL /movie ID API_key is equal to TMDB config dot API key. So we have just crafted the endpoint which we want to call. As the second parameter, we want to provide it an object where the method will be set to get and the headers will be set to TMDB config dot headers. We already prepped everything beforehand. Finally, if the response is not okay, we simply want to throw a new error saying something like failed to fetch movies or movie details. That's a bit more precise. But if response is okay, we want to get the data by awaiting the response.json. Typically, when you use fetch, you need to say response.json to extract the data. And finally, we want to return the data, which in this case is the movie details. So now that we have created this function, let's head over into the page that we haven't touched so far, which is this one, Movies ID, a dynamic route that displays the details of that specific movie. Let's start with the JSX. We're wrapping everything with a view that has a class name equal to bg-primary and flex-1. If I save it, how do we get to that page? Well, you just have to click on one of the touchable opacities or one of the buttons. So choose whichever one you want. I'll go with the gladiator. And now we can render the movie details. I'll render them within a scroll view because it is possible that the height of the details will span more than the height of the device. And I'll give it a content container style equal to padding bottom of 80. Within it, I'll display a view, and within that view, I'll display an image that'll have a source equal to URI, and we once again have to have that starting part of a photo, https://image.tmdb.org/t/w500, and then we render the movie ?poster path. But of course, we first have to fetch the movie details. So this is exactly where that function that we just created comes into the picture. First, we need to get the ID of the movie that we're trying to get the details for. And we can do that by destructuring the ID by using the use local search params hook. Once we have the ID, it is pretty simple. We just say const destructure the data, rename it as movie, also accept the loading, and make it equal to the use fetch hook call, within which we can have a callback function that then calls the fetch movie details. And we need to pass the ID as string right into it. So now we get access to that movie. And if you click on one of those movies, you can see that we get redirected. We no longer have an error, but to be able to see the poster, we have to give this image a class name of wfull, and let's do something big like h550 pixels. There we go. So now it takes that upper part of the screen. Looking good. We can also give it a resize mode equal to stretch. There we go. So now it is looking even better. Now below that view, we can render another view that'll have a class name equal to flex-call, items-start, justify-center, margin top of 5, and padding x of 5. We're just creating some space for the text elements that'll go within it. So let's create the space for the first text element that'll render the movie ? Title. And we can style it by giving it a class name equal to text-white, font-bold, and text-XL. There we go, Gladiator 2. We can go below this text and render another view. This view will have a class name equal to flex-row, items-center, and a gap x of 1 in between the elements, as well as a margin top of 2 to divide it a bit from the elements above. Within this view, we can show one more text. This one will have a class name equal to text-light 200 and text-sm. And within it, we can render the year. We already learned how to do that. Movie ? Release _date ? Split by the dash and get only the year. Oh, but the index of 0 has to come after the split. There we go, 2024. Right below this text, we can render another text with the same styles. So that'll be a class name of text-light 200 and text-sm. And within this one, we can render the movie ? Runtime. So this one lasts for 184, and we can add M at the end, which stands for minutes. Now we can exit this view, and we can create another view below to show some more information. This one will have a class name equal to flex-row, items-center, bg of dark 100, padding x of 2, padding y of 1, rounded-md, gap x of 1, and a margin top of 2. And within this view, we can render an image that'll have a source equal to icons, coming from constants icons, dot star, as well as a class name equal to size of 4. And there we have it. One little star right there. Right below that image, we can render a piece of text that'll have a class name equal to text-white, font-bold, and text-sm. And within it, I'll put a dynamic block of code and round up the current score by saying math.round movie ? vote _average. Or if it doesn't exist, simply take 0 just so it doesn't break. And we can say out of 10. So this one is 7 out of 10. Right below it, we can also render another piece of text that'll have a class name, that'll have a text-light 200 and text-sm. And within this one, we want to show the number of votes. So in parentheses, I'll say movie ? vote count, and then I'll say votes. So this one got 2,947 votes. It matters, right? We want to know how many people have rated it on average 7 out of 10. And now we want to show a couple of these movie labels, like the overview, release date, status, genres, and so on. Each one has a little title on top and then the actual content. That means that we can turn it into a reusable component. So right at the top, I'll create a new reusable component and call it movie info. So const movie info is equal to a function that'll destructure the props of label and value. So for each value, there is a label. They'll be of a type movie info props, which we can define just above by saying interface movie info props. And it has a label of a type string, as well as an optional value of a type either string or number or null. Perfect. And then we can open up a function block with an immediate return, which means that we just put parentheses right here and not curly braces. So what do we return? Well, it'll be a view with a class name of flex-call, items-start, justify-center, and a margin top of 5. And right within it, first, we show a piece of text that has a class name of text-light 200, font-normal, and text-sm. And within it, we render the label. And next, we can have a text just beneath it with a class name of text-light 100, font-bold, text-sm, and margin top of 2. And within it, we render either the value or a string of NA. Value doesn't exist. And now we can use this movie info a couple of times right here below our view that contains the vote count. So let's go right below it and let's render a couple of these movie info components. The first one will have a label of overview and the value of movie ? overview. And if you self-close it, check this out. Immediately, it looks super nice. Let's also render one more just beneath it. This one will have a movie info of genres, and the value will be movie ? genres ? map, where we get each individual G as in genre, and then we can say return G.name. And then outside of that function, we can say .join them with something like a dash in between, like this. Or say NA, doesn't exist. So if you do this, you'll see action, adventure, drama. Looking good. Now let's create one more view below this movie info. This one will have a class name of flex, flex-row, justify-between, and a W of 1/2, so that is 50% of the width. And within it, I'll show another movie info component with a label of budget and a value of $movie ? budget, and we can divide it by 1 million and then render the data in millions. That'll look something like this. Budget is 310 million for this movie. Still within the same view, but just below this movie info, we can also show the revenue. So the label of revenue and a value of, we want to do the same thing right here, but we can round it up a bit. So we can say a template string of math.round movie (revenue). And once again, we want to divide it by 1 million and save it. And at the start, we can add a $sign as well, right here. So now we can see that the revenue is 458 million, which means that this movie is already profitable. Finally, we can go below this view that wraps the two of them, and we can create one more movie info. This one will have the label of production companies, and it'll have a value equal to movie (production_companies.map), where we get each individual company, and for each one, we return its name, and we can join them by a dash, which will look something like this. Or if it doesn't exist, we can simply say NA. There we go. So now we can see Paramount Pictures, Scot-Free Production, and more. Many people worked on this movie. Finally, just below this entire scroll view at the bottom, we can render a touchable opacity, a button to go back to the previous page. So it'll have an image that'll have a source equal to icons.arrow with a class name equal to size-5, margin right of 1, margin top of 0.5, and rotate 180, and a tint color equal to #FFF. So if you render it, you can't see it just yet, but below it, I'll render a text that'll say go back, and I'll give it a class name equal to text-white, font-semi-bold, text-base, and now you can see it. But of course, we have to style this touchable opacity a bit better by giving it a class name of absolute, bottom-5, left-0, right-0, margin X of 5, BG of accent, rounded-LG, padding Y of 3.5, flex-row, items-center, justify-center, and a Z of 50, so it appears above other elements. And there you have it, a movie details page with a go back button. Of course, to actually make it work, we can use the router functionalities. So let me give it an on press and call the router, which we can import from Expo router, dot back. If you save it and click go back, take a look at that. It actually goes back, but you can also just scroll or swipe from left to right on iOS to go back as well. And now you can see the movie details for all of these different movies, not only the popular ones or the trending ones, but also the ones that you search for. So if you have your favorite movie, I don't know which one it is. Once again, let me know down in the comments. Well, you can find it right here and see all of its details. And I gotta say, the app is super, super responsive. It works very well, and you can see as I swipe up and down and as I open different pages, it is just super efficient. And this brings us to the end of the movie details page. And we're almost done with the entire app. This is pretty amazing, I gotta say. Just before we finish it off, I wanna make sure that we have something on the saved and profile pages too, because right now they look super blank. So let's head over into those two pages, starting with the profile, and I'll just tidy them up a bit. So we have a nice blank screen, but then if you want to, you can go ahead and implement additional functionalities. This is an exercise for you to improve this app even further and to put the skills you've gained from this video to the test. First things first, let's get rid of this ugly white screen by rendering a class name to this view and giving it a BG primary, as well as a flex of 1 and a padding X of 10. That's better. Within it, let's also render another view, which we'll use to center our icon in the middle. So I'll give it a class name of flex, justify-center, items-center, flex-1, flex-call, and a gap of 5. Within it, we can render an image that'll have a source equal to icons.person and a class name equal to size of 10, as well as a tint color equal to #FFF. Oh, and make sure to import the icons from constants and then reload the app. While it's reloading, we can also add the text element right below it that'll simply say profile. And we can style it by giving it a text-gray-500 as well as text-base. So now if you head over to the profile, you see a little profile icon in the middle waiting for you to implement that profile screen. What we can do is also copy this entire view, head over into saved, and override the saved as well. But this time, it's not going to be icons.person, it'll be icons.save, as well as it'll say save. So now if you head over into the saved, you can see that it looks great as well. Again, I don't want to simply give you everything in this course, because then there's not going to be an incentive for you to try some things out. So I invite you to go ahead and implement that save movie functionality to save your favorite movies into a collection. You'll have to work a bit with Appwrite to have some persistent storage, and it'll be very similar to tracking our metrics right now. Instead of searches, you'll be tracking the clicks when somebody clicks a heart on a specific movie, for example, and then you'll have to create a second function that'll fetch all of the favorited movies. Pretty cool, right? I know it might sound difficult at first, but trust me, as you get a hang of React Native, it'll all start making sense very soon. Especially if you dive into JS Mastery Pro, where we dive a bit deeper into how React Native works under the hood, as well as how we can optimize it for bigger applications. Great. That's it for this lesson. This was a big one. And to finish this course off, I want to show you one little gotcha that I found. It's those little things that you don't find in the documentation very easily, but rather it's a best practice that you have to dig through GitHub discussions to figure it out fully. I zoomed out this code so you get a better understanding of the entire homepage that we have right now. Notice a couple of things. We have a single scroll view right here, where we said show vertical scroll indicator is set to false. But it doesn't matter that we're hiding the indicator. This scroll view is a vertical view. And within that vertical view, we also have another flat list, this one right here, which renders all the movie cards. Those movies are also in a vertical view. And it is not generally recommended to have two virtualized lists or scroll views or flat lists in the same orientation. See, this flat list is not a problem. This one is horizontal, and that's okay when it comes to the performance. But having two huge flat lists that are of the same orientation is generally not considered a good practice. We're using a scroll view to render most of the movies. And if you go to the docs, it's going to say scroll view versus flat list. Which one should you use? Well, scroll view renders all its children components at once, but this has a performance downside. Imagine you have a very long list of items you want to display, maybe several screens worth of content. Creating JS components and native views for everything all at once, much of which may not be even shown, will contribute to slow rendering and increased memory usage. And this is where the flat list comes into play. Because flat list is smart. It renders items lazily just before they're about to appear, and it removes the items that scroll way off the screen to save memory and processing time. So in other words, when you have large lists of vertical elements, you want to use a flat list and not a scroll view. And in our case, if you look at the flat list, we technically didn't allow it to reach its full potential because we have set scroll enabled to false, which technically means that we let the scroll view do its job, even though it is totally fine, perfectly fine for our use case as we don't have many elements and we wouldn't even been able to harness the power of the flat list. For bigger applications, it makes a big difference. And that's exactly why I wanted to leave this for the end of this video. While it is totally fine for smaller apps, for larger apps, you just gotta be smarter and utilize everything that the software allows you to do. In this case, React Native's built-in components, like the flat list, are super powerful, but you gotta know how to use them. Below this lesson, I'll leave the improved codebase for how the homepage should have looked like if it had hundreds or thousands of elements. So if you wanna check it out, you can go ahead and do that. But this is just one little optimization out of hundreds or thousands that we go over on JS Mastery Pro. So check it out, cancel at any time, or get a refund if you don't like it. But given how many resources we have in our knowledge base and within our paths, it's hard not to find something that you can learn from and that'll help you advance your career. With that in mind, great job on coming to the end of this phenomenal project, allowing users to find their favorite movies, search for them, and then the algorithm that actually checks which movies have been searched most often, and therefore they get displayed right here on the homepage. Looking good, feeling good, it is responsive, and it is the best of mobile development that React Native offers. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on jsmastery.pro. Have a great day.